Chapter 484, Aurora Nights 2. The chamber had fallen into a stunned silence. I could feel the weight of every gaze, surprised, calculating, envious, fearful. Good. Let them stare. Let them wonder. The Aurora Nights' arrival had changed the game entirely, shifting the balance of power in a way even the most obstinate Eastern patriarchs couldn't ignore. Lilith's presence alone would have been enough. My cousin had carved her reputation with blood and brilliance across a dozen battlefields before I'd even picked up my first training sword. But she hadn't come alone. She'd brought enough firepower to level a small country. Father never did believe in half measures. I turned to Dia, who stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. The Eastern families had been ready to throw her to the wolves moments ago, to punish her for crimes she hadn't committed, for blood she hadn't spilled. Now they wouldn't dare touch her. But staying here, surrounded by those who had called for her head, wasn't an option. She deserved better than grudging tolerance bought through fear. I extended my hand to her, aware of every eye tracking the movement. "Princess Dia," I said, keeping my voice formal despite the intimacy of the gesture, "the Windward family would be honored if you would accept our protection and hospitality during this difficult time." Her eyes met mine, confusion giving way to understanding. I wasn't just offering her safety, I was offering her a chance to escape the weight of her father's shadow, to be judged on her own merits rather than her lineage. Her voice faltered and I saw tears beginning to form in her eyes. I couldn't possibly impose. It would be no imposition, I assured her. In fact, I insist. She hesitated, looking around at the assembled Eastern leaders. Many had averted their gazes, suddenly finding the architectural details of the chamber fascinating. Others made no effort to hide their displeasure, but none dared voice it now. "Thank you," she said, finally placing her hand in mine. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her grip was firm. "I accept your generous offer, Lord Windward." I nodded, allowing myself a small smile of satisfaction. Then I turned to the others, my friends, my colleagues, my reluctant allies in the chaos we'd survived together. "The invitation extends to all of you," I said. "The northern continent is far from this conflict, for now at least. The Windward estate can offer safety and resources while you decide your next steps." Cecilia snorted, tossing her hair with characteristic defiance. "And miss the fight? Not bloody likely." Rose shook her head. "I'll be more useful here." "I'm staying," Arthur said simply, his expression set in that stubborn determination I'd come to recognize all too well. Always the hero, that one. I turned to Ciola, whose eyes had never left the window since we'd entered the chamber. She was looking east, toward Warian, toward her family's ancestral lands, toward everything she'd lost. "Ciola?" She turned to face me, her expression carefully composed once more. "My continent is burning," she said quietly. "My family is fighting. My place is here." I nodded, understanding without agreeing. Part of me wanted to insist, to bundle her onto a Windward ship bound for safety. But I knew better than most the weight of family duty. "The Moang techniques were designed for survival," I said, echoing my words from earlier. "Use them well." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I will." "Actually," Lilith interjected, stepping forward with the precise timing that had made her such a formidable battlefield commander, "there's one exception." She turned to Rachel, her expression softening slightly. "Lady Rachel Creighton, your father has issued a direct order for your return. King Creighton has specifically requested his daughter's immediate evacuation from the conflict zone." Rachel's face went pale. It's non-negotiable, I'm afraid," Lilith said, her tone gentle but firm. "The request comes directly from King Creighton to King Windward." Given their long-standing friendship, my uncle agreed immediately. The weight of royalty. Even I felt it, and my family ruled our own section of the northern continent. Rachel's father wasn't just her parent, he was a king and one of the North's most powerful rulers. His word wasn't request, it was law. Rachel looked to Arthur, raw emotion breaking through her usual composed demeanor. "I can't just leave," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Not now. Not when your father needs you safe," Arthur finished for her, stepping forward. "And we need allies who understand what we're facing." They stood there, the space between them charged with everything they weren't saying. I looked away, feeling like an intruder witnessing something private. "I'll come back," Rachel said finally, her voice steadying with resolve. "Once I've convinced my father of what's at stake, I'll return with reinforcements." Arthur nodded, managing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm counting on it." Rachel moved to him then, embracing him with a fierceness that surprised even me. Arthur hesitated only a moment before returning the embrace, his eyes closing briefly. "Don't do anything stupid until I get back," she whispered, just loud enough for those of us nearby to hear. "Define stupid," he replied, and I caught the hint of a smile in his voice. She pulled back, composing herself with visible effort, then turned to the rest of us. "Take care of each other," she said, her eyes lingering on each face in turn. "I'll see you all soon." I watched as she said her goodbyes to the others, noting how Cecilia's usual sharpness softened, how Seraphina's formal reserve gave way to a genuine embrace, how even Rose seemed affected by the parting. Emo had remained silent throughout the exchange, his calculating gaze missing nothing. Now he stepped forward, addressing me directly. "You've placed us in an interesting position, young Windward," he said, voice low enough that only I could hear. "Not quite an ally, not quite an occupying force." I met his gaze evenly. "Consider it insurance. For all our sakes." He nodded once, then turned to address the assembled leaders. "We will reconvene in 3 hours to discuss strategic deployment." Until then, see to your people's needs. The dismissal was clear. The Eastern leaders filed out, their expressions ranging from thoughtful to thunderous. Lilith barked a few crisp orders to the Aurora Knights, who moved with mechanical precision to secure the exits and establish a perimeter. We'll depart within the hour, she informed me. The flagship is waiting at the northern landing pad. I nodded, then turned to Dia, who still stood beside me, her hands still in mine. I'd almost forgotten I was holding it. Pack whatever you brought with you, I told her gently. The hypersonic transport will have us back in northern territory within hours. She nodded, seeming unable to find words. I released her hand and she followed one of the knights who would escort her to gather her belongings. As the chamber emptied, I found myself standing with Arthur, Ciola, and the others who had chosen to stay. This isn't goodbye, I said, feeling the need to fill the sudden silence. Just a strategic redistribution of resources. Fancy way of saying you're running away, Cecilia quipped, but there was no real heat in her voice. The North won't stay neutral for long, I replied. We're just choosing the battlefield. Arthur nodded, understanding the strategy even if he didn't agree with it. Keep her safe, he said, and I knew he meant Dia. I will, I promised. Ciola stepped forward then, her composure firmly back in place. Tell your father thank you, she said. For sending the knights. They'll make a difference here. Tell him yourself when this is over, I replied. The Moang family will always have a place at the windward table. We clasped forearms, warrior to warrior, friend to friend. No more needed to be said. The northern landing pad was a hive of activity as preparations for departure were finalized. Dia had already boarded the flagship, escorted by 2 Aurora Knights who would guard her with their lives if necessary. Rachel was speaking with the ship's captain, her royal status earning her a private cabin despite the hasty nature of our evacuation. I stood at the edge of the pad, taking a last look at Mount Hua at the east. The sky was darkening to the east, unnaturally so. Whatever the vampires had started at Starcrest was spreading. Quite the power play, cousin, Lilith's voice came from behind me, the formality of the council chamber replaced by the familiar teasing tone I'd grown up with. Uncle would be proud. I turned to find her leaning against a cargo container, her helmet tucked under one arm, a knowing smile playing at her lips. It was necessary, I said with a shrug. She nodded, her smile widening. Particularly necessary for the pretty princess with the golden eyes, I noticed. And that rather intense farewell with the Moang girl. My, little Lucy, you've been busy at school. I felt heat rising to my face and cursed inwardly. 7 years my senior and she could still make me blush like a child. It's not like that, I muttered. Dia needed protection. Ciola is a valuable ally. Of course, Lilith agreed, her tone making it clear she believed nothing of the sort. And I'm just here because I missed your charming company. I shot her a look. Why are you here, Lil? Father could have sent anyone to lead the knights. Her teasing smile faded, replaced by something more serious. Because this isn't a simple border skirmish or trade dispute, Lucy. This is the beginning of something bigger. Much bigger. She gestured toward the eastern horizon, where darkness continued to gather. Uncle wanted someone he could trust absolutely to assess the situation. And to keep you safe. I don't need a babysitter, I bristled. No, she agreed. But you might need a sister. Especially with what's coming. Before I could ask what she meant, a signal flare lit up the sky, the departure warning. Time to go, Lilith said, straightening. Her teasing smile returned as she clapped me on the shoulder. Don't worry, I won't tell Uncle about your little harem situation. Though I can't promise not to tease you mercilessly during the journey home. They're not, I began, but she was already walking toward the ship, her laughter floating back to me on the mountain breeze. I sighed and followed, wondering not for the first time how someone as deadly as Lilith Windward could also be so infuriatingly childish when it came to tormenting her younger cousin. As I boarded the flagship, I cast one final glance at Mount Hua, at Arthur, Ciola, and the others we were leaving behind. A strange heaviness settled in my chest, a feeling I wasn't accustomed to. Worry. For them. For what they would face. Stay alive, I murmured too quietly for anyone to hear. Just stay alive until I return. The ship's engines roared to life and the east began to fall away beneath us. Chapter 4, 85, Friends. The cabin they gave me was luxurious, yes, more mana-regulated marble, glowing vines on the walls, and windows that adjusted their tint based on my mood, but all of it felt hollow. Like sitting in a velvet-lined cage. I had my arms crossed, legs folded, and my forehead crumpled like I was personally offended by the weather. The sky outside was darkening. The eastern skyline always did that thing where it looked like the horizon was brooding. Fitting. So was I. I ground my teeth hard enough that the cabin's lighting dimmed a notch, as if the room itself was trying to help me vent. It didn't help. Then I sighed and unclenched everything. No point gnashing my teeth into powder. As much as I wanted to be furious at my father, king of the Creighton family, Ninth Circle Mage, General Pain in Arthur's ass, I couldn't quite summon the hatred I wanted. Not really. Because he did love me. Excessively. Annoyingly. Stubbornly. The kind of love that came in the form of background checks on every friend I made and occasional accidental appearances on the battlefield. And yes, his hostility toward Arthur was frustrating, but he never crossed a line. Just toe-tapped it a lot. Still. I wanted to be with Arthur. Not here, not safe. There. With him. My phone buzzed. I didn't need to check who it was. Of course it was him. I swiped to answer, the screen flickering on to reveal my father's face. The king of the Creighton family, protector of the North, slayer of beasts, and right now, a tired dad trying not to look worried. My princess, he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Did you get on the plane? Yeah, I said flatly. One word. Frosted with contempt and disappointment, because why not be dramatic when you have royal blood and your boyfriend's still on a battlefield? He winced. Just slightly. Ratch, don't pout like that. I blinked. My lips were pursed. How did he even? Right, this was a man who'd once noticed a change in my blink pattern mid-battle and sent a healer. I'm mad, I snapped. Arms crossed tighter now like I could wring the frustration out of myself. I know. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. But you're my daughter first, before you're anything else. And if anything happened to you out there, I'm not sure I'd be able to stop myself from leveling half the eastern continent. It wasn't an empty threat. A ninth circle mage who cared too much was a continent-sized problem. And he did care. That was the worst part. He wasn't doing this out of paranoia or politics. He was just being a father. A powerful, exasperating, mana-shattering father. I get it, I said, softer now. But Arthur's still there. His eyes closed. Not from disapproval, but from fatigue. He knew what I meant. Not just that Arthur was strong, he was. Not just that he defeated a mid-ascendant vampire elder without help he had. But that wasn't the point. The point was I wasn't there. What if I'd been too late? What if he'd died before I arrived? What if No. I couldn't allow myself to drown in what-ifs. I was Rachel Creighton. We didn't do helpless. We'll talk when you're back, he said, gently this time. I'll make arrangements. Just rest for now. You're coming home. The call ended. I stared at the screen for a moment, then slowly lowered the phone into my lap. I didn't want to rest. I wanted to move. I wanted to be there, to fight, to burn every last vampire who even looked at Arthur the wrong way. But for now, all I could do was hope the northern continent would send reinforcements. And that I'd be at the front of them. A knock at the door yanked me out of the thought spiral I'd been comfortably drowning in, thoughts of war, Arthur, and a to-do list titled ways I could have changed the course of history if allowed to punch my father just once. I blinked, sat up, and padded across the warm mana-imbued floor of my private cabin. The door hissed open to reveal Lucifer, standing there like a tall apology. Hey, he said, rubbing the back of his neck like it owed him an explanation. Can we talk? I nodded and stepped aside, letting him in. The door sealed behind him with the kind of whisper only expensive doors make. What about Dia? I asked, arching a brow. She's asleep, he replied, plopping himself down on the edge of the window seat like someone not used to furniture that didn't look like it wanted to stab you. She was pretty worn out after, well, everything. I hummed at that, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth before I could stop it. Lucifer had changed. Genuinely changed. It wasn't just the clothes, though the long coat with integrated armor plating and old Windward family insignia in radiant blue was a definite upgrade from his earlier brooding Prince of Angst aesthetic. It was him. The way he carried himself now didn't scream look at me, it just quietly said I'll handle it. He hadn't always been like this. 2 years ago, I couldn't stand being around him. He had all the charm of a spike chair and just enough prophecy backing to make me pretend I liked sitting on it. But Arthur had dismantled that entire farce like it was made of wet paper and ego. Yeah? Now I didn't feel like I had to be his friend. I wanted to be. It's good to see you smile at me, Lucifer said, tilting his head slightly. There was no smugness in it. Just genuine surprise. Like someone watching a cat not bite them for once. I'm just glad you finally became the hero we needed, I said, leaning against the desk. It glowed faintly under my hand, registering my presence like an obedient pet. I thought you chose Arthur over me, he said, casually. No venom. No self-pity. Just a statement tossed out like a question wearing a trench coat. I pursed my lips. People like the idea of being heroes. On paper, it sounded glorious, titles, cheers, magical sponsorship deals. But being one was exhausting. Bloody. Lonely. I chose Arthur, yes, I said slowly, but that doesn't mean we only needed one hero. We need two. I don't want him carrying the burden alone. Lucifer blinked. Slowly. Then he smiled in that awkward, lopsided way of someone who hadn't smiled honestly in a while and was still getting used to the muscles involved. It made me feel worse somehow. I rubbed my arm, eyes drifting to the floor. He hadn't always been this person. And yeah, he'd been awful at times, entitled, arrogant, utterly convinced the world owed him a standing ovation, but I wasn't exactly guiltless either. I hadn't tried to help him become better. I just hated that he wasn't better. Maybe I thought that was enough. That he'd figured out. That his insane talent would carry him the rest of the way. When he didn't change fast enough, I gave up and convinced myself he wasn't worth changing. I failed him in a way I hadn't realized until now. I'm sorry, I said finally. I said it before, but I'll say it again, Lucifer, you really are like a hero now. His eyes widened again and he gave a sheepish little laugh as he rubbed the back of his head. And you really are like a saintess now, Rachel. I smirked. Well, I try. I take that back, he deadpanned, just in time for me to let out a proper laugh. It felt good, this. Simple. Like walking into a familiar room and finding someone had finally dusted it. Anyway, I said, grinning, you seem to be taking extra special care of the little caged princess. His ears turned pink. Lucifer Windward, literal heir to ice and steel, possibly the future second hero, was blushing. It's my duty, he coughed. I scoffed. Oh, please. The room echoed with the sound of two friends finding their way back to each other. And in a world where the skies bled red and monsters clawed through the cracks in reality, that was no small miracle. Chapter 4, 86, Kagu Family, 1. The return to the Kagu family residence wasn't dramatic. No trumpets. No sweeping declarations. Just the soft thrum of landing gear and the quiet creak of pressure-stabilized doors opening after hours of high-altitude silence. I stepped onto the sleek polished stone of the private landing bay, the kind that hummed slightly when you walked across it, as if annoyed to be stepped on by mortals. I wasn't alone. Jean Ashbluff, Ian Vizirian, Arya Gu, and Ava Pung filed out behind me, all looking like they'd just been introduced to the concept of existential dread. Because, in fairness, they had. Being evacuated from the Southern Sea Sun Palace by a compact evac plane because the larger crafts had been prioritized for less terrifyingly competent people does that to you. It had enough space for 5, barely, and enough tension to make breathing optional. Vampires. They weren't just a problem on the eastern continent. They were the problem. Demons were worse, sure, but demons at least didn't pretend to be civil. Vampires wore politeness like a murderer's glove. They'd ended the eastern continent's golden age with all the grace of a guillotine wrapped in velvet. Even the radiant dragon couldn't stop the fall entirely. Once, we'd stood above the other continents like a well-dressed older sibling pretending not to gloat. Yeah? Now we were holding on with gritted teeth and scorched earth. At the center of it all stood the vampire monarch. Not just a name, a bloody full stop in the history books. Mid-radiant rank. A walking apocalypse. Only one man stood in his way, Marshal King Magnus Dracar, a mid-radiant rank human who'd turned dodging extinction into a daily routine. If he lost, the East wouldn't be a war zone. It would be a warning label. Run. My father's voice snapped through the evening haze like a well-thrown punch. I looked up to see him striding toward me, his expression caught somewhere between relief and battle readiness. He had the same sharp violet eyes and bone-white hair as me, though thankfully without the strange side effects of the god's eyes. That little genetic lottery ticket had been mine alone. He was the second strongest in the family, right behind the family matriarch, my aunt, who was currently throwing hands with horrors in the Southern Sea Sun Palace. Which told you everything you needed to know about our bloodline. Come, he said, looking over all of us, you need rest. That was rich coming from a man who'd once trained for 48 hours straight just to feel the rhythm of the fist. Still, we nodded. No arguments. Ava and Arya moved like their souls were still waiting to catch the next flight home. Jean and Ian were in better shape, being from the western and southern continents respectively, but even they looked like they were chewing on the global implications. Because this wasn't just our problem. This was a warning flare to the whole world. Miasmic species didn't believe in borders. They believed in chaos, and that belief was catching. We followed behind my father down the crystal-lit hallway. Light panels inlaid with ancient sigils glowed a faint, reassuring blue. Mana dampeners purred in the walls. The whole house smelled like lavender and lightning. Comforting. Familiar. Fragile. Ren? I turned and there she was. My little sister. Violet-eyed and porcelain-faced, looking up at me with a mix of curiosity and worry. Her twin brother stood beside her, one hand gripping the edge of the doorframe like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to be here. They were named He and Min, more traditional names selected by my mother in a brief act of rebellion against our usual family habit of picking names that sounded like they came with a power rating. He Min, my father said with a sigh, I told you to go to your room. Where's your mother? Before either of them could fabricate an answer, and they were quite good at it, I heard the hurried steps of someone who just realized their genetically gifted children were unsupervised near traumatized evacuees. Honestly, He Min. My mother gasped as she swept into the hall. She scooped them both up with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Her long emerald green hair trailed behind her like a cape, golden eyes glowing faintly with suppressed stress. She was beautiful. Graceful. Unshaken. A storm in the shape of a mother. None of her features had made it into us kids. The Kago bloodline tended to win genetic arguments by showing up early and loud, and mine had declared victory before I was even born. Sorry about that, she muttered to my father, cradling the twins. He simply shook his head. They're fine, he said, his voice softening slightly. They've been worried. My mother's eyes swept over me and my fellow evacuees, her gaze lingering on our disheveled appearance and the shadows under our eyes. Without a word, she shifted both twins to one arm, a feat of strength that would have been impressive if I hadn't seen her bench press a small car during family training, and tapped her comm unit. Karis, have the guest suites prepared, she instructed. And send a Medscan team to the East Wing. Priority Level 3. Level 3 meant they're not actively bleeding out, but check for everything else. I almost smiled at the familiar protocol. The Kago family didn't do anything by halves, especially not hospitality layered with medical paranoia. My father, Kem Kagu, the Iron Fist, though he hated the epithet, gestured for us to continue following him. You'll all have quarters in the East Wing, he explained. Security is tighter there, and it connects directly to the underground shelters if necessary. Are we expecting an attack? Ian asked, his southern accent thickening with concern. The Vizirian family controlled significant military assets in the southern continent, and Ian had been raised to think in terms of strategic vulnerabilities. My father's expression didn't change. We're expecting everything and assuming nothing. Standard procedure when vampires are involved. He led us into a spacious common room, its high ceiling dotted with softly glowing orbs that adjusted their brightness based on occupants' preferences. The walls were lined with bookshelves, real paper books, not data screens, and comfortable seating arranged in a loose circle. At the center, a holographic display currently showed a three-dimensional map of the eastern continent, red markers indicating areas of confirmed vampire activity. There were far too many red markers. Sit, my father said, gesturing to the seating. Eat something. Talk if you need to. But rest. All of you look like you're about to collapse. As if on cue, service drones glided in, bearing trays of food and drinks. Nothing elaborate, simple, nutrient-dense options designed to replenish depleted mana reserves and stabilize blood sugar. The Kaga household might look luxurious, but at its core, it was a military installation with better interior decorating. We settled into the seats, the exhaustion finally catching up with us now that we were somewhere genuinely safe. For several minutes, no one spoke. We just ate, drank, and stared at nothing in particular, our minds still processing everything we'd witnessed. Ava was the first to break the silence. My family, she began, her voice wavering slightly. Has there been any word from the Pung compound? My father's expression softened fractionally. The main compound is secure. Your mother activated the ancestral arrays as soon as the attacks began. Last report indicated minimal casualties among your immediate family. Ava's shoulders slumped with visible relief. The Pung family was one of the 5 great houses of the East, with considerable resources and ancient defensive systems. If any family could weather the storm, it was theirs. And the Gu family? Arya asked, her usual brash confidence subdued. A shadow crossed my father's face. Fighting. The coastal estates were hit hard, but your father has rallied significant forces in the northern territories. Arya nodded, absorbing the news with the stoicism her family was known for. The Gu were warriors first and politicians second, and they would be on the front lines until the last of them fell. What about Starcrest Academy? I asked, the question that had been burning in all our minds. Our school. Our home for the past 3 years. Gone, my father said simply. The vampires took it within hours. We don't know why they targeted it specifically, but they wanted it intact. They're using it as some kind of operational base now. The news hit like a physical blow. Starcrest wasn't just a school, it was a symbol of Eastern prosperity, of our cultural commitment to cultivating the next generation of power. Its fall meant more than just the loss of a building. Jean, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. And the Southern Sea Sun Palace? What are those who stayed behind to fight? The battle continues, my father replied. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Aunt Celine was the strongest member of our family, a low radiant ranker whose power had earned her the title Twilight Ice Sovereign. If anyone could survive that Hell's Cape, it was her. You should all get some rest now, my father said, rising to his feet. His knuckles bore the faint, silver-white scars of countless battles, badges of honor in a family that valued power above all else. Your rooms have been prepared. Each has a secure comm unit if you need to contact family members, and the house AI will provide any assistance you require. We stood, the movement sluggish with fatigue. As servants appeared to guide each person to their assigned quarters, my father placed a hand on my shoulder. His palm was calloused, hard from decades of transforming his body into a weapon more lethal than any blade. Sleep well, Ren, he said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. We'll talk more tomorrow. Chapter 487, Kagu Family 2. I woke to the gentle chime of the room's environmental system adjusting to my conscious state. The lights slowly brightened to a warm amber, and the temperature shifted from the cooler sleeping setting to something more comfortable for waking hours. For a moment, I simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, almost able to pretend I was back at Starcrest in my dormitory. Almost. The knock at my door was firm, unmistakably my father's. 3 precise raps, evenly spaced. I sat up, running a hand through my disheveled white hair. Enter, I called, my voice still rough with sleep. The door slid open with a whisper. My father stood there, already dressed in training attire, loose black pants, and a sleeveless gray shirt that did nothing to hide the powerful musculature of his arms. The Kagu family crest, a stylized eye within a spiral, was embroidered in silver over his heart. But it was his expression that fully woke me, tense, grave, the look of a man about to deliver news he didn't want to give. Get dressed, he said simply. There's something you need to know. 10 minutes later, I followed him down a corridor I recognized as leading to the family's private medical wing. My heart began to pound as pieces clicked into place. The specialized facilities. The security protocols. The way the medical staff nodded to us with solemn respect as we passed. Your aunt, my father began, then stopped, seeming to search for words, something I'd never seen him do before. My father always knew exactly what to say, even if it wasn't what you wanted to hear. A cold weight settled in my stomach. What about her? He took a breath. She's been recovered from the Southern Sea Sun Palace. A specialized extraction team brought her out last night. Relief flooded through me. She's back? Is she here? I should run. The weight in his voice stopped me cold. She's in a medical stasis pod. She's unresponsive. Injured? I asked, though I already knew that wasn't it. Aunt Celine had survived injuries that would have killed most immortal rankers. No visible physical trauma, my father said, his clinical tone at odds with the worry in his eyes. Her mana pathways are intact. Her brain activity is normal for deep sleep. But she won't wake up. The medical team can't identify the cause. I stared at him, the implications sinking in. A coma? Aunt Celine is in a coma. He nodded, his face grim. Something happened in that palace, Rin. Something that could incapacitate a radiant rancor without leaving a mark. And until we figure out what it was. He didn't need to finish the thought. We were all vulnerable. Even the strongest among us. The war had just become infinitely more terrifying. My father's fists clenched at his sides, the knuckles whitening. I recognized the gesture, the physical manifestation of his desire to solve a problem with his hands, to punch his way through whatever threatened his family. But this enemy couldn't be hit. This threat couldn't be beaten into submission. For perhaps the first time in his life, the Iron Fist had found a problem he couldn't solve by fighting. And that, more than anything, terrified me. We stood in silence before Aunt Celine's stasis pod. Through the frosted glass, her form was a blur of white and blue, her signature colors even in unconsciousness. Medical displays scrolled with data in cryptic patterns that only specialists could decipher, though the red indicators needed no translation. Critical. Unknown. Unprecedented. We should go, my father finally said, his voice low but carrying the unmistakable edge of command. The others will be gathering for breakfast. I nodded, unable to form words. What could anyone say in the face of this? If Aunt Celine, the Twilight Ice Sovereign, scourge of the Northern Wastes, survivor of the Blood Moon Massacre, could fall without a fight, what hope did the rest of us have? The walk back was silent until my father spoke. Your classmates received communications from their families during the night. Classmates was a generous term for my relationship with the other evacuees, but I didn't correct him. Jean and Ian will be returning home today, he continued, his footsteps never faltering. Their families have sent transport. That wasn't surprising. The Ashbluff and Vizirian families wouldn't let their heirs linger in the epicenter of a vampire uprising. They'd want them safely behind their own ancestral defenses, preparing for whatever came next. When we entered the dining hall, the mood was somber despite the lavish spread laid out across the table. Arya and Ava sat close together, speaking in hushed tones. They'd grown up in neighboring estates and had been inseparable since childhood, a rare genuine friendship among the calculated alliances of the great houses. Jean stood by the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning light, gaze fixed on the distant mountains. His posture was impeccable as always, hands clasped behind his back in the traditional Western stance of contemplation. I'd never seen him slouch, not even during the worst combat drills at Starcrest. His jet-black hair was immaculately styled despite everything, not a strand out of place. Jean Ashbluff wore control like others wore clothing. It was his first defense against a chaotic world. And then there was Ian, who somehow managed to look cheerful despite everything. He was piling his plate with fruits and pastries, chatting animatedly with one of the serving staff, something about a recipe his mother used to make. A burst of laughter escaped him, bright and incongruous in the solemn atmosphere, before he caught himself and offered an apologetic smile to the room. That was Ian Vizirian, a perpetual ray of southern continent sunshine in human form. His family controlled most of the maritime trade routes and specialized in weather manipulation techniques, and Ian himself seemed to embody that bright, changeable energy. His golden bronze skin practically glowed with vitality, and his amber eyes sparkled with an irrepressible zest for life that even a vampire uprising couldn't fully dim. "Morning, everyone," I said, forcing normality into my voice as I took a seat. Ian immediately bounded over, sliding into the chair beside me with a plate heaped with colorful foods. "Run. Have you tried these berries? They're infused with some kind of mana stabilizer, absolutely genius. Makes me feel less like I've been trampled by a herd of nightmare beasts." Despite everything, I found myself smiling. Only you could be this enthusiastic about breakfast after what we've been through. He grinned, the expression lighting up his features. "What's the alternative? Moping won't kill vampires." He popped a blueberry into his mouth and made an exaggerated sound of pleasure. "Besides, we need to keep our strength up. Can't fight the forces of darkness on an empty stomach." "Neither will optimism," Jean commented dryly, finally joining us at the table. Where Ian was all warmth and animation, Jean moved with the measured precision of a calligraphy brush, each step deliberate, each gesture economical. His silver blue eyes betrayed nothing of his thoughts, but the tightness around his mouth suggested he was as affected as the rest of us. "Maybe not," Ian conceded, undeterred, "but it'll keep us from defeating ourselves before the fight even begins." He nudged Jean with his elbow. "Isn't that what Master Liang was always saying? The mind surrenders before the body." Jin's expression softened fractionally at the mention of their shared combat instructor. "Something like that," he admitted, selecting a single piece of fruit with careful consideration. "Though I doubt he was referring to your particular brand of relentless cheer." "Of course he was." Ian protested with a laugh. "Why do you think he always paired us up for sparring? Your gloomy disposition and my sunny outlook perfectly balanced as all things should be." "He paired us because no one else could keep up with you," Jean replied, but there was the faintest hint of affection in his otherwise neutral tone. "Your unpredictability required someone with—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Patience." Ian clutched his chest in mock offense. "You wound me, Abluff. And here I thought it was my dazzling personality and stunning good looks." My father cleared his throat, interrupting their familiar banter. "I understand you'll both be departing today." The playfulness drained from Ian's expression, though he maintained a small smile. Jean merely nodded once. My family's transport arrives at noon. The Western Summit Council has called an emergency session. And mine's coming in about an hour, Ian added, his normal exuberance dimming slightly. My father wants all Viserion vessels recalled to southern waters. They're establishing a maritime blockade. Smart, Ava commented, her delicate features thoughtful. Vampires can't cross running water without assistance. Ian's usual smile twisted into something grimmer. That's the theory we're betting the continent on. He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the serious turn of the conversation. At least I'll get to see my little sisters. They've probably turned my room into a fort for their dolls by now. And what about you two? I asked Daria and Ava, wanting to give Ian a moment to compose himself. Chapter 488, Kagu Family 3. Arya straightened, her posture shifting instantly from casual to martial. My father has ordered me to remain here. The Gu family believes pooling resources with the Kagu is our best option. Her orange eyes flashed with a determination that bordered on ferocity. Besides, our coastal estates are overrun. There's nowhere else for me to go. Ava's delicate features hardened. The Pung compound remains secure, but my mother thinks I'm safer here for now. Our defensive arrays are holding, but... She trailed off, the implication clear. Even the legendary Ping family barriers might not withstand a concentrated vampire assault. A heavy silence fell over the table, broken only by the soft sounds of silverware against porcelain. The reality of our situation pressed down on us, 5 students in the 3rd year of our education. Well, Ian said finally, his voice forcibly bright, at least we got out with our lives. And our good looks. He winked at Ava, who rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a small smile. And speaking of getting out, he glanced at his communication band, which had begun to pulse with a soft blue light. That's my ride. Apparently, my father's impatience has accelerated the timetable. After breakfast, we gathered in the landing bay to see Jean and Ian off. Ian's vessel arrived first, a vibrant blue and gold craft shaped like a sea serpent, trailing iridescent mana particles that dissipated in the air like sea spray. It settled onto the landing pad with a musical chime rather than the standard pneumatic hiss. That's my ride, Ian announced unnecessarily, adjusting the collar of his jacket. The momentary shadow that had crossed his face during breakfast had vanished, replaced by his usual sunny disposition. But I'd known Ian long enough to recognize the strain behind his smile, the deliberate effort it took for him to maintain his cheerful demeanor. He embraced each of us in turn, ignoring all protocols of formal leave-taking. When he reached me, he gripped my shoulders firmly. Don't do anything heroically stupid, he said, suddenly serious. I've got tickets to the Southern Sea Luminescence Festival next season, and I'm counting on you being alive to use the second one. I managed a smile. I'll do my best. Your best is terrifying, he replied with a wink, then stepped back and offered a surprisingly formal bow to my father. Thank you for your hospitality, Sir Kagu. My father inclined his head. Safe travels, young Viserion. Tell your father. He paused. Tell him the Kagu family stands with the South. Something passed between them, an understanding that transcended the traditional rivalries between our continents. Ian nodded, suddenly looking older, more like the heir to one of the South's most powerful families. Then, with a final wave and his trademark grin, he bounded up the ramp to his transport. The vessel rose with a musical hum, its mana engines pulsing with blue-gold light, and then it was gone, streaking southward, leaving a trail of luminescent particles that hung in the air for several heartbeats before fading away. Jin's transport arrived next, a sleek, gunmetal gray vessel emblazoned with the Ash Bluff family crest of interlocking mountain peaks. It hummed with suppression technology designed to mask both its mana signature and physical presence. Typical Western engineering, pragmatic, efficient, and utterly without flourish. Jean said his goodbyes with characteristic reserve, a formal bow to my father, respectful nods to Arya and Ava, and a firm handshake for me. The Western continent won't abandon the East, he said quietly, his normally impassive face showing the faintest trace of emotion. Whatever happens, remember that. My father may be cautious, but he's not blind to the threat. I nodded. Take care of yourself, Jean. Always do. He glanced in the direction Ian's ship had disappeared. Keep an eye on that one when he returns. His heart is bigger than his sense. When? I raised an eyebrow. Not if. Jean almost smiled. You think anything could keep Ian Viserion away from a fight? Especially one involving his friends? He shook his head. The southern blockade will hold for a while. But Ian, he'll find a way back. It's in his nature. As Jean boarded his transport, I caught a glimpse of something in his expression, a flicker of concern, perhaps even fear, quickly masked behind his stoic facade. For someone as controlled as Jean Ash Bluff to show even that much emotion spoke volumes about the gravity of our situation. We watched until both vessels disappeared from sight. The landing bay felt emptier, the reality of our situation more stark. 2 continents retreating, securing their borders. The East left to stand alone against the vampire tide. Come with me, my father said abruptly. All of you. We followed him through the complex network of hallways that comprised the Kagu family residence, descending several levels via a secure elevator that required both a mana signature verification and retinal scan. The air grew cooler, charged with the distinctive crackle of high-level containment wards. I recognized our destination just before the massive doors came into view, the Void Chamber, the heart of the Kagu family's military operations. The doors swung open silently, revealing a cavernous space dominated by a circular platform surrounded by holographic displays. Around the platform stood a dozen men and women in the distinctive midnight blue uniforms of the Void Vanguard, the Kagu family's elite combat unit comprised of only the most powerful and trusted fighters. My father strode forward and the assembled vanguard snapped to attention. At ease, he said, taking his position at the head of the platform. He gestured for us to join him. For those who don't know, he began, addressing Arya and Ava, this is the command center for the Void Vanguard. Typically, only Kagu blood members are permitted entry, but these are not typical times. His gaze swept the room, taking in both the seasoned Vanguard members and us 3 students. The Eastern continent stands on the brink. The vampire monarch has made his move and we have suffered our first major casualty. A murmur ran through the Vanguard. News of Aunt Celine's condition had clearly not yet been disseminated. Celine Kagu, the Twilight Ice Sovereign, lies in a mana-induced coma of unknown origin, my father continued, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. Our strongest fighter incapacitated without a single mark upon her body. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with implications. If Aunt Celine could fall. We cannot wait for the vampire monarch to press his advantage, my father said, breaking the silence. The Void Vanguard will deploy immediately to secure key strategic locations and establish a defensive perimeter around the central territories. He turned to me, his violet eyes burning with an intensity I'd rarely seen. Run. You have the god's eyes. Your ability to see mana patterns is unmatched even among the Kagu. I am assigning you to the Vanguard's reconnaissance division, effective immediately. The room spun briefly around me. The Void Vanguard? Me? I was barely into my 3rd year at Starcrest, nowhere near completing my training. And yet, the god's eyes. My cursing gift, the reason I could see the world in ways others couldn't, perceiving the intricate patterns of mana that flowed through all living things. Aryagu and Avapang, my father continued, your families have agreed to place you under Kagu protection and command for the duration of this crisis. Your skills will be invaluable. Arya's combat prowess and Ava's barrier techniques complement our existing capabilities. Both women straightened, their expressions a mixture of surprise and determination. This is not a decision I make lightly, my father said, his voice softening slightly. You are young. In an ideal world, you would have years more training before facing a threat of this magnitude. But we do not live in an ideal world. We live in one where vampires have taken Starcrest Academy, where a radiant ranker lies unconscious from an unknown attack, and where our entire way of life hangs in the balance. He looked at each of us in turn, his gaze lingering on me. The vampire monarch thinks he has struck a decisive blow. He believes the East will crumble in fear, that our strongest fighters will retreat to protect themselves and their families. His fists clenched at his sides, power rippling visibly beneath his skin. He is wrong. I stepped forward, my decision made before I even realized it. I accept the assignment, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. The god's eyes, so long a source of alienation and whispered rumors at Starcrest, would finally serve a purpose beyond making me an oddity. Arya moved to stand beside me. The Gu family has never run from a fight, she declared, her hand moving instinctively to the hilt of her ceremonial dagger. Ava joined us, her delicate features set in uncharacteristic resolve. The Pung barriers will hold the line, she said softly but firmly. My father nodded, satisfaction and sorrow mingling in his expression. Then it settled. Welcome to the Void Vanguard. May the ancestors guide your steps and strengthen your hearts. He turned to the assembled warriors. Prepare for deployment. Dawn tomorrow, we take the fight to the enemy. As the meeting disbanded, I caught a glimpse of myself reflected in one of the darkened display screens, violet eyes glowing faintly with the power of the god's eyes, white hair almost luminescent under the chamber's lights. I barely recognized the determined young man staring back at me. I was no longer just Rinkagu, 3rd-year student at Starcrest Academy. I was Rinkagu of the Void Vanguard, and the vampires would learn to fear the sight of my eyes. We had all changed in the span of mere days. The carefree days of Mythos were behind us. The war had truly begun. Chapter 4, 89, Honorary Elder 1. The day started like most others in Mount Hua, quiet skies, clean wind, and the faint scent of tea and sword oil. Deceptive peace, which in our world was merely the breath between battles. Then came the thunder, not from the sky, but from the ground. Metal boots. Synchronized. Unhurried. Like they owned the mountain. I stepped outside just in time to see them arrive, 12 Imperial Knights in burnished white armor crested with golden filigree that shimmered under the late morning sun. Their helmets gleamed like mirrors and their weapons At their head marched a man I recognized immediately, because you don't forget the kind of face that comes with a body count. Sir Darius von Helbrecht, commander of the Imperial Knights. High immortal rank. Taller than most men, broader than all, and carrying the kind of aura that made the very air around him hum like a live wire. His sword, unusual for someone from the Empire, was sheathed at his hip in a case of matte ethersteel. Behind me, Cecilia had already joined me on the stone steps. Rose was there too, walking up with a half-eaten rice bun in one hand and a deep frown already forming. The knights stopped a few meters away, not a step closer. Sir Darius removed his helmet with one gauntlet hand and tucked it beneath his arm. A fresh scar ran across his forehead. evidence of the ongoing vampire conflict that had already claimed 3 border cities. Princess Cecilia Slatemark. Lady Rose Springshaper, he said, his voice the verbal equivalent of a cold morning blade. I come bearing the words of His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Quinn Slatemark, first of his name. One of the knights stepped forward, extending a small golden scroll cylinder. Darius didn't take it. He never needed to. His words carried the weight of the Empire. You are hereby commanded to return to the capital city of Avalon with immediate effect. The vampire armies have broken through the eastern defensive line. This decree is issued for your safety, and to preserve Imperial continuity as the war intensifies. Rose scoffed before I could. Imperial continuity? You're evacuating us like we're fragile eggs in a war basket while the bloodsuckers tear apart the countryside. Cecilia didn't scoff. She stepped forward, shoulders squared. I am the crown princess of the Empire, she said coolly. You don't command me. My father does. And he wouldn't send you without cause. Sir Darius's gaze didn't flicker. Your father's seal is on the decree. He sends his love. And his orders. The vampire monarch himself led the assault on Greenfall yesterday. The death toll. He paused, the slightest tremor in his voice. We cannot risk you, Your Highness. This is ridiculous, Rose snapped. You think pulling us away from Arthur, away from this, is the answer? What good is continuity if there's nothing left to return to? I exhaled, stepping between them just as I saw Rose's knuckles tightening. Stop, I said, calm but firm. Don't fight this. Not here. Cecilia's eyes darted to mine. I saw the rebellion there, hot, sharp, and deeply personal. But I also saw the trust. Serafina appeared at the edge of the courtyard, her midnight blue robes billowing slightly in the mountain breeze. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of the Imperial entourage, then widened when she realized their purpose. Silver threads woven into her collar and sleeves caught the sunlight. Protection against vampire influence. Arthur, she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. Is this what I think it is? I nodded almost imperceptibly. Imperial evacuation. Non-negotiable. Serafina's hand found mine, hidden in the folds of our robes. Her fingers were cool, but they tightened around mine with surprising strength. We'd known this day might come, but knowing and facing were entirely different creatures. I placed my other hand on Cecilia's shoulder. You'll be back, I said, and you'll be stronger, but not if you fight your own people now. Rose looked like she was going to throw the scroll case at someone, but even she hesitated when I nodded at her. You know I hate this, she muttered. Those vampires are tearing through our lands, and we're running. You and me both, I said. But you know they wouldn't come unless the threat was real. Cecilia turned back to Sir Darius and finally spoke, this time like the princess she was born to be. Then we obey, she said tightly. But know this. If anything happens to him while I'm gone, she paused, eyes locking onto Darius's like missiles locking a target. I'll hold the Empire responsible. He gave a shallow nod. Understood. The 2 women turned to me. Rose walked up first, flicked her rice bun into the bushes, and threw her arms around me. Try not to be a hero, idiot, she whispered. Those vampires don't play fair. I grinned. No promises. Then came Cecilia. No words, just the press of her forehead against mine. Hands on my cheeks, breath shaky but eyes steady. I'll come back, she said. No matter what. I'll be here, I said. I always am. They turned and walked toward the waiting vessel. The Imperial flagship floated just above the summit, humming with the quiet power of levitation engines capable of taking it to hypersonic speed. Its ramp extended with soft hydraulic hiss. I noticed the hull was scored with burn marks and what looked suspiciously like claw marks, evidence of recent skirmishes with airborne vampire nobles. They didn't look back, and neither did Darius. I stood there until the flagship vanished into the clouds. The wind returned, and just like that, the mountain was emptier. Again, Serafina's grip on my hand hadn't loosened. If anything, it had tightened, her knuckles white with tension. I glanced at her, really looking for the first time since the Imperial Knights had arrived. Her face was composed, as always, but there was a shadow in her eyes that I recognized all too well. You're worried about something else, I said quietly as we turned back toward the inner courtyard. What is it? She hesitated, which wasn't like her at all. Serafina had always been direct to the point of bluntness, a trait that had gotten her into trouble with the elders more times than either of us could count. Uncle Lee, she finally said, her voice barely audible above the rustle of pine needles beneath our feet. He was on the eastern island when the vampires attacked. The evacuation alert came through, but he hasn't reported in. I stopped walking. Lee Zenith, my master, Serafina's uncle. I took her other hand in mine. If anyone could survive, it's him. We walked in companionable silence toward the south peak, where the old peach trees grew. It had always been our place. First as children stealing away from lessons, then as teenagers avoiding responsibilities, and now as adults seeking moments of peace in an increasingly chaotic world. I climbed up first, finding our familiar perch among the gnarled branches. Serafina followed, settling beside me with practiced ease. From here, we could see the entirety of Mount Hua, its 5 peaks stretching toward the heavens like fingers of a massive hand reaching for the sky. In the far distance, a column of black smoke rose where East Bridgetown had stood just last week. Another casualty in the vampire's relentless advance. "Do you think we'll win this war?" she asked suddenly, her eyes fixed on the distant smoke. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. The vampire invasion, the fall of the Eastern Territories, the mounting casualties. I think, I said carefully, that victory and defeat aren't as simple as they used to be. This isn't like the sect wars of old. The vampire monarch isn't just fighting for territory. He's fighting to remake the world in his image. "That's not an answer," she chided. "No," I admitted. "But it's the truth. I don't know if we'll win, but I know we'll fight." Serafina leaned her head against my shoulder, a rare display of vulnerability. "If Uncle Lee didn't make it." "He made it," I insisted, more forcefully than necessary. "He's probably complaining about the quality of tea on whatever rescue vessel picked him up, and lecturing everyone about proper vampire killing techniques." As if summoned by my words, a cry went up from the main courtyard below. We both turned to see a junior disciple racing toward the south peak, his face flushed with exertion. "Your Highness, Sir Arthur," he called, his voice carrying on the mountain air. "He's back. Master Lee has returned." We descended from the tree in a blur of movement, racing back toward the main gate. Sure enough, there he was, Lee Zenith, the lightning Dagon of Mount Hua, looking battered but very much alive. His right arm was in a makeshift sling, and a nasty bite wound ran from his temple to his jaw, but his eyes were clear and alert as ever. Serafina broke protocol completely, rushing forward to embrace her uncle with uncharacteristic abandon. "We thought," she began but couldn't finish. "It takes more than a few blood-sucking nobles to keep me from my niece," Lee said gruffly, his good arm wrapping around her briefly before he gently disengaged. His eyes found mine over Serafina's shoulder. "Arthur," I bowed formally. "Master, it's good to see you returned safely," Lee snorted. "Save the formalities for the other elders. I taught you better than that." I straightened with a smile. "You look terrible. What happened?" Serafina asked, stepping back to examine his injuries more carefully. "The island is gone," Lee said, his expression darkening. "And your injuries?" I asked, noting the way he favored his left side. "A parting gift from one of vampire ancestors. Caught me as I was boarding the last vessel." He shrugged, then winced at the movement. "Nothing that won't heal. The bite's clean, no infection." The sex healers arrived then, insisting on taking Lee to the medical pavilion despite his protests. Serafina went with them, throwing me a look over her shoulder that promised we'd continue our conversation later. Hours later, after Lee had been properly treated and fed, the 3 of us sat in his quarters. Serafina poured tea with practiced movements, the ritual bringing a semblance of normalcy to an increasingly abnormal day. "The princesses and princes have been evacuated," I informed Lee, who nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. Lee set down his teacup with deliberate care. "Arthur, you must fight for Mount Hua as an honorary elder." Chapter 490. Honorary Elder, 2. He said it in the same tone one might use to offer a second helping of rice. Which, considering the context, was ridiculous. Mount Hua wasn't just a sect, it was the sect. The beating heart of the Eastern Continent's martial world. And their elders? Ascendant rank, minimum. People who could split a mountain or crush a tank with their aura if the mood struck them. Honorary Elder. The words hung in the air like a sword over an unwatched head. I didn't respond immediately, because even I needed a second to recalibrate my expectations of reality. Fortunately, Luna spoke in my mind before I could make a fool of myself. "It's a good deal," she said. "Take it. You need a reason to be here, this gives you one. They're giving you authority without making you bend the knee." Smart move. And it was smart, because I wasn't from the Eastern Continent. Technically, I didn't have the right to insert myself into their war. But now, with this, I wasn't interfering. I was fulfilling a sect obligation. Political maneuvering disguised as flattery. I liked it. Serafina, standing beside me with arms crossed and eyebrow raised, clearly wasn't as immediately convinced. "Uncle," she said, turning to Lee. "Arthur's not even an ascendant ranker yet." It was a valid point, harsh but fair. Lee waved it off with the sort of confident dismissal only a man who had personally outdueled a wyvern and then complained the tea had gone cold could manage. He took down a vampire elder on his own, he said. That's more than some of our elders can say. Half of them wouldn't have walked out of that fight. His rank may be integration, but his strength punches 2 leagues up. And more importantly, Arthur wants to level up even further. Don't you? He looked at me then. Not like he was asking a question, but like he was already filling out the paperwork and just needed me to nod. And I did. Because he was right. I was at high integration rank. The wall to Ascendant was in sight 7 months, give or take. But mana wasn't everything. Skill mattered. Experience mattered. And there was no experience quite like a continent-wide war against blood-sucking immortal aristocrats. I had trained hard in the well of miasma, sharpened every edge I had. But this was the real crucible now, actual battle with lives on the line and no do-overs and dealing with war plans and tactics. And if I was being honest, I didn't want to leave Seraphina behind. Not that she needed protecting. She was the princess of Mount Hua, a force in her own right. But after everything we'd been through, standing on the sidelines while she walked into hell wasn't an option I was willing to accept. Besides, my masters were fighting. The martial king was already clashing with the vampire monarch in the north. Li himself would be on the front lines soon. It wouldn't be right for their disciple to do anything less. So I gave Li a nod, and the words that followed felt oddly natural for something so weighty. I'll do it. I accept the title. Li smiled the way old warriors do, half pride, half pity. Because he knew exactly what kind of fire I was walking into. Good, he said. Welcome to the war, Elder Nightingale. Seraphina's question hit me like a thrown boot in the middle of a quiet room. But what about your parents? I froze mid-step. It was a simple enough sentence, the kind you'd ask a friend who forgot their keys. But it carried the weight of a freight train. Right? My parents. My sister. The part of my life that hadn't seen miasma, war councils, or ancient vampire monarchs. The part that still expected messages and birthdays and maybe a casual holocall now and then. I turned to Li, who was lounging in that particular Mount Huawei where it looked like he was doing absolutely nothing but was probably planning someone's funeral 3 steps in advance. Could I visit them? I asked even though I knew the answer. He didn't even pretend to smile. Just sipped his tea with the serenity of someone watching a house burn down from across the street. It's difficult, he said, which in Eastern political terms translated to next to impossible. We have military-grade transports, yes. But diverting one to the Slatemark Empire just to shuttle a single person there and back. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Resources were stretched thinner than ration noodles, and everything that could fly was either transporting troops or supplies. And the warp gates, completely offline, shut down tighter than a noble's wallet during tax season. I thought briefly about calling in favors. Rose had pull. Cecilia had more than that, imperial weight behind her name and titles that made intercontinental red tape vanish like a bad dream. But I shook the idea off. I wasn't going to use them for something like this. No, I'd do what people in a high-tech, post-transcendental society always did in emotional situations. I made a video call. The screen flickered for a moment. Eastern continent networks weren't built for high-traffic war zones. And then my parents' living room came into view. It was late evening in the Empire. Comfortable lighting, the faint smell of coffee probably hanging in the air. My mother was the first to appear. Alice Nightingale, black hair tied into a loose bun, blue eyes sharp enough to cut glass even through pixels. She was still in her work blouse, but her expression softened the moment she saw me. Arthur, she said, moving closer to the screen. It's really you. My father appeared over her shoulder, Douglas Nightingale, broader than me in the shoulders, still wearing that quiet, analytical frown he always carried like a second skin. Then Arya slid into frame, clearly having dashed from another room. Her hair was messier than usual, tied back in a rush, and she was wearing a Slatemark Academy sweatshirt. Second year. Top 5% in the second-best academy in the world, and she made sure everyone knew it. Where have you been? She blurted. Do you know how many rumors are going around about the Eastern continent right now? I've been busy, I said. Understatement of the decade. Busy with what? Saving the world? She shot back, arms crossed. The answer, of course, was yes, but I didn't say it. Douglas stepped in, ever the diplomat. We saw the news from the Eastern continent. Vampires, war movements, radiant clashes. And now Mount Hua's involved. They asked me to become an honorary elder, I said. You could have heard a pin drop. Or, more likely, the gentle hum of a ceiling fan in their living room. Even Arya stopped mid-eye roll. You're what now? Alice said slowly. Honorary elder, I repeated. It gives me the right to stay to fight. It's not just ceremonial. They're going to need every capable fighter, and I have to be here. I want to be here. Douglas didn't argue. He didn't need to. His eyes flicked to Alice, then Arya, then back to me. He understood. He always had. Alice, though, leaned forward. Arthur, I know you think you have to carry this weight, but you're not even 20 yet. Do you understand what you're walking into? I do, I said quietly. I've already seen it. I've fought in it. Arya was biting her lip now, clearly unsure whether to tell me I was an idiot or just cry. You're always doing this. You run off to Mythos, then end up in some secret realm, and now you're in a continent-wide war zone? What are you trying to prove? Nothing, I said. I'm not trying to prove anything. They didn't speak for a moment. Then Douglas finally gave a small nod. The kind that said he'd support me, even if it broke him to do so. Alice sighed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Promise you'll call more. I will. And if things get worse, Arya added quickly, you let us know. You don't just go silent again. Or I swear I'll come to Mount Hua myself. Understood? I said, cracking a tired smile. We love you, Alice said. Love you too, I replied. And then the screen faded, leaving only my reflection and the silence of the room. Behind me, Serafina didn't say anything. She just placed a hand on my shoulder, gentle and grounding. I hadn't realized how much I needed that. Chapter 491. Price of the Empire. The world spun faster now, its movements dictated by the dark tide of the Red Chalice cult and the resurgent vampires. To say the world responded would be generous. No, it had been forced into action. Reluctance gave way to urgency, and every continent girded itself for the storm. In the east, the situation was most dire. The great families and sects scrambled to recall their far-flung warriors, pulling back those who had once been sent abroad to aid other lands. Now, they were needed at home to face the full fury of a species long thought extinct and the zealots who worshipped them. This was no skirmish. This was war. A real, bloody, soul-crushing war. Troops clashed on battlefields that stretched from the shores of the azure expanse to the valleys of the Moonshadow Mountains. Blades met claws, spells tore through the air, and the earth itself bore the scars of the conflict. The eastern continent became a battleground where life was measured in fleeting moments, and death claimed its toll without prejudice. There were losses, significant ones. In the south, west, and north, the cults of shadow and flame stirred, their movements forcing the great powers of those lands into defensive postures. Armies were raised, borders reinforced, and alliances strained under the weight of old rivalries and new fears. Yet even in this chaos, the East bore the brunt of the vampire resurgence. It was here, on these blood-soaked fields, that the stakes were highest. Far from the chaos of battle, Quinn, Emperor of the Slatemark Empire, tapped his fingers against the cool surface of a marble table. Before him, a cluster of holographic displays illuminated the chamber in pale light, each one brimming with data, troop movements, and grim reports. His eyes moved with the precision of a swordsman, tracing the paths of the world's unraveling. The weight of it all rested heavily on his shoulders, though his face betrayed none of the strain. This was not the first time Quinn had stared into the abyss of war, but even he felt the edges of unease creeping in. The Slatemark Empire, the only superpower untouched by the black magic species, stood as humanity's last unbroken bulwark. That fact brought no comfort to Quinn. It only meant the weight of responsibility bore down on him harder than ever. He drummed his fingers once more, the sound a steady rhythm in the otherwise silent chamber, a staccato counterpoint to the maelstrom of thoughts swirling in his mind. The path forward was clear, no matter how heavy it weighed on him. Reinforcements were not just a necessity, they were an inevitability. The East, besieged and bloodied, could not hold alone. A week had passed, and still, Magnus Drakkar was locked in his battle against the vampire monarch while Selim Kagu was in a coma. Titans clashed in isolated domains, but the ground beneath them bore the weight of their struggle. The vampires were no mere rabble clawing for survival, they were an overwhelming force. Their resurgence a chilling testament to their hidden power. Even with Mo Zenith, his swordsmanship as beautiful as it was deadly, his plum blossoms blooming with defiance, the East had managed only to stave off annihilation. Victory remained a distant dream. The East, long a bastion of strength after 2 centuries of peace, found itself faltering. They had flourished after the death of the heavenly demon, their unity forged in the fires of their shared survival. And yet, it wasn't enough. The vampires had emerged from extinction, armed with power enough to rival the might of an entire continent. It was unthinkable. And yet here it was, reality laid bare in the cold reports on Quinn's desk. The East was strong, stronger than even the Slatemark Empire, if Magnus Drakkar's allegiance to the East was factored in. But strength, Quinn reminded himself, was not always enough. Darkness could drown even the brightest sun, and Mo Zenith's efforts, as valiant as they were but a flickering candle against a gale. Quinn exhaled sharply, pushing the thought aside. The East's plight, as pressing as it was, could not eclipse the problem standing directly before him. His daughter. Cecilia stood with her arms crossed, her crimson eyes blazing with defiance. Her glare could have wilted lesser men, but Quinn met her gaze with a calm steadiness. He had faced radiant rank adversaries and entire councils of dissenting nobles. One determined princess, no matter how fiery, would not unsettle him. "I won't send you," he repeated, his voice measured and firm, though he could already see the protest forming on her lips. "I have to go, father," Cecilia said, her tone resolute. "Arthur is there on the battlefields." "I am aware," Quinn replied, his voice clipped but calm. "And that is precisely why you will stay here." Cecilia's fists clenched at her sides. "You can't expect me to sit idly while they risk their lives." Arthur is not my concern," Quinn interrupted, his voice rising slightly, though he regretted the words as soon as they left his mouth. He softened his tone, though the steel remained. "You are my concern, Cecilia. You are my daughter and the princess to the Slatemark Empire. I cannot risk you on a battlefield already drenched in chaos." Cecilia's eyes narrowed, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. "You think I'm a child? That I can't defend myself? You've trained me, father. You know I'm more than capable." "Your capability isn't in question," Quinn replied, his voice like granite. "It's the value of what you represent. The Empire cannot afford to lose you." "And what about what I value?" Cecilia shot back, her voice rising. "What about Arthur? What about the East? Are they expendable to you, father?" Quinn's gaze hardened. "Watch your tone," he said quietly, though the weight of his authority pressed down like a storm. "You think I don't understand? That I don't feel the weight of every life lost? Every plea for aid? But emotions cannot dictate decisions of state. The East has its champions. You are not needed there." "I am needed there," Cecilia snapped, stepping closer, her eyes blazing. "If not as a warrior, then as a leader. You taught me to lead, father. You taught me to protect what matters." "And Arthur?" "Arthur," Quinn said sharply, cutting her off, "is a soldier, just as countless others are. His life is no more important than any of theirs." "That's not true, and you know it," Cecilia whispered, her voice cracking. "Arthur is more than that. He's everything." Quinn's expression softened, just for a moment, as he saw the raw emotion in her eyes. He sighed deeply, rubbing his temples as he searched for the words to make her understand. "Cecilia," he said finally, his voice quieter but no less firm, "your place is here for now, not because I doubt you, but because the Empire needs its princess. You must trust me in this." "And you must trust me," Cecilia replied, her voice trembling but resolute. "I won't stand by while the people I care about fight and die. If you won't send me, I'll find another way." Quinn's eyes narrowed, his patience tested. "Do not mistake defiance for bravery, Cecilia. One misstep, and you could cost us far more than you realize." "Then let me prove you wrong," Cecilia said, her voice a quiet challenge. The room fell into silence, the tension between them a palpable force. Finally, Quinn turned away, his gaze returning to the holographic displays. His shoulders sagged slightly, the weight of his role pressing down once more. "Do what you must," he said at last, his voice weary. "But know this, if you fall, you will leave this empire weaker, not stronger." Cecilia didn't respond. She turned on her heel and left the chamber, her crimson eyes burning with determination. Quinn watched her go, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he could not protect her from the storm she was walking into. Chapter 492, Archmage Charlotte 1. I stepped out of my father's office and immediately licked my lips. They always went dry when I was irritated, and right now I could have sucked the moisture out of a desert and still been annoyed. Arthur was out there, probably swinging a sword at some miasma-dripping vampire with Serafina practically glued to his side, fluttering her lashes like she wasn't trained to kill a man in 37 different ways. I wasn't worried about him dying. Arthur was the kind of person who could stumble through a war zone and come out the other side with cleaner boots. No, I was worried about her. The whole noble, deadly princess act, the gentle discipline, the way she stood next to him like she'd always belonged there. That couldn't be allowed. Absolutely not. But it wasn't just petty jealousy. Not entirely. Because I'd seen the gap too. Arthur wasn't just stronger, he was more. Smarter in the ways that mattered, quicker to adapt, faster to see through lies. I'd always been the one people expected to lead. The one with the gift, the bloodline, the empire behind her. But when it came down to it, he'd pulled ahead. I hated that. Not because he'd passed me, but because I didn't want to be left behind. The reports from the Eastern Front arrived daily on my father's desk, and I'd taken to stealing them before his advisors could sanitize the contents for imperial consumption. 3 major victories in the past month alone. The Battle of White Moon Pass, the Allied offensive that reclaimed 3 cities. The defense of Cedar Ridge where Arthur had held the line for 3 days with minimal resources. Each report mentioned him. Not always by name, sometimes as Dracar's disciple or the Mount Hua representative. But I knew. I always knew. Meanwhile, I was stuck in Avalon City, attending diplomatic functions and reassuring nobles that yes, the war was going splendidly, and no, there was absolutely no chance vampires would reach the capital. The perfect princess. The imperial figurehead. Useless. So I did the thing I swore I'd never do unless I absolutely had to. I pulled out my phone, took a deep breath, and dialed the number. It rang once. "Hello, Master. I need your help." 20 minutes later, a sleek, military-grade car glided into the inner courtyard of the Imperial Palace. The guards didn't even blink, just stood a little straighter. When the door hissed open, out stepped a woman with red hair like burning thread and eyes like cut emerald. She wore robes that flickered with embedded circuit threads, old magic fused with cutting-edge tech, because Charlotte Alaric didn't believe in choosing just one apocalypse-proof method of self-defense. My father, Emperor of the Slatemark Empire and not easily impressed, watched her approach from the throne room stairs with the expression of someone preparing for a very polite natural disaster. "Zenith of magic," he said. "Archmage. Tower Master. To what do I owe this honor?" Charlotte offered a bow so shallow it was almost a smirk. "Your Majesty, I'm here for my disciple." He turned his crimson gaze toward me, and I could practically hear the internal sigh. The man had orchestrated half the empire's politics like a chessboard, but his daughter taking control of her own future still managed to catch him off guard. "You knew she was my master," I said with a shrug. "That was your plan, wasn't it? Tie the Tower of Magic to the Empire." He closed his eyes briefly, then reopened them with the practiced serenity of someone pretending their daughter hadn't just poked a hole in 3 diplomatic threads at once. "She cannot leave Avalon City," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request but an imperial decree. Charlotte nodded as if that were a suggestion she might consider if she were feeling particularly generous. "She won't," she replied. "She'll train under me here, on neutral ground. No politics, just power." He hesitated, just for a second. Then he turned his back, a signal in itself. "Do as you wish," he said, which in imperial speak meant, "I disapprove but recognize I can't stop you without causing an incident." I smiled, a real one this time. "Thank you, Father." And then I turned toward Charlotte. She gave me a look. Not exactly warm but not cold either. More like a flame in a lantern. Controlled but only just. "Let's begin," she said. And that was that. I'd made my move. If Arthur was going to burn like a star on the battlefield, then I would become the light that lit the sky behind him. The car's doors hissed shut behind us with the smooth finality of a prison cell. A very comfortable, magically reinforced, self-driving prison cell, but a prison cell nonetheless. Especially once Charlotte flopped onto the seat like a cat made of overcooked noodles. To most of the world, Charlotte Alaric was the terrifying and untouchable zenith of magic. A woman who could erase cities if she so much as tripped in the wrong direction. Revered, feared, dignified, the sort of person you bowed to, preferably from orbit. Unfortunately, I knew better. "You really treat your master like this?" she asked, half buried in her seat, arms sprawled like she was auditioning for the role of Magical Corpse #1. Her voice was the theatrical kind of tired, the sort that required energy to sound that defeated. "Yes," I replied without hesitation. She gave a long, theatrical sigh, like a balloon deflating in defeat. "You know," she muttered, "training Arthur was way more fun. At least he made good tea." My jaw tensed. It wasn't the tea comment. It was the name. Charlotte noticed instantly. Of course she did. She didn't miss a damn thing unless she was trying to. Her emerald eyes flicked sideways with the precision of a laser-guided missile. "You want to get stronger for him, don't you?" she asked, far too smug for someone wearing mismatched socks and a coffee stain on her robe. I didn't answer. I considered lying. Briefly. And then I remembered who I was talking to and just nodded once. Charlotte practically glowed. If she'd had a tail, it would have been wagging. "Ah," she said, beaming like a witch who just discovered a new potion ingredient in her soup. "My little wild girl's grown up all soft and romantic. Arthur really is a miracle worker. I should thank him again. Maybe send him a fruit basket. Or a rocket launcher." "Shut up, Master," I muttered into my hand. She cackled. Loudly. It echoed in the enclosed space and made the car lights flicker slightly, which was probably unrelated but still felt like the vehicle itself was laughing at me too. I stared out the window at the familiar city skyline as we pulled away from the palace. I was beginning to regret this decision. Not the training. That was necessary. But the part where I had to spend hours with Charlotte Alaric? Yeah, I'd forgotten what fresh hell that was. Chapter 493, Archmage Charlotte. 2. Eva Lopez let out a sigh heavy enough to rattle the hallway sensors into thinking someone had opened a window. Her heels tapped smartly against the marble floors of the Lopez estate, echoing like a slow drumbeat of impending maternal doom. Her navy blue hair, pinned back with the sort of grace only a headmaster could muster at 7 a.m., swayed as she approached her daughter's door. Again, Clara had not seen the sun in 4 days. Or a lecture. Or the inside of a shower, probably. Mythos Academy, the most prestigious school for magically inclined prodigies in the world, was closed for the remainder of the year, courtesy of the war in the eastern continent. 2 professors dead. Dozens of third-year students gone. Magic left scorch marks, and grief left silence. So now Eva was home, and so was her daughter. But the word present was doing an awful lot of heavy lifting, because Clara had barricaded herself in her room like a hermit whose diet consisted of snacks, ennui, and a general refusal to acknowledge the outside world. Eva knocked out of habit rather than hope. The door unlocked with a whisper of manna. It was the only kind of energy Clara seemed willing to exert these days. Eva stepped inside. Food? Clara asked hopefully, peeking out from her fortress of blankets like a particularly lazy ghost. Then, upon realizing it was her mother and not a tray of something deep-fried and unbalanced, she flopped back down with a defeated groan. Go away. Eva folded her arms. There was thunder in that posture. Clara, I gave you 4 days. Your mistake, came the muffled reply. Eva twitched, with the sort of swift, efficient motion that could only come from years of managing hormonal teenage spellcasters and paperwork thicker than spellbooks. She yanked the blanket off. Clara hissed in protest, curling up tighter in her oversized nightgown, clinging to a teddy bear that looked like it had seen war. She patted the bed blindly, eyes half closed, hunting for her blanket like a spellcaster seeking lost mana. "No," she whined, flopping around like a beached seal. "Cold." Eva's eyebrow twitched harder. "Get up." "You can't make me," Clara mumbled, already halfway back to sleep. Eva stared at her only child, the brilliant, beautiful, utterly infuriating prodigy of the mind aspect, currently engaged in a full-scale cuddle operation with a pillow. She'd done her best. Raised Clara alone after her husband died. Made time between academy crises and diplomatic disasters to come home and parent, even if it was just over a meal or a call. She had hoped Clara would be more like her. Driven, ambitious, upright in posture and spirit. Instead, she got Clara. Intelligent, talented, and possessed of the drive of a sleepy cat in a sunbeam. Eva knew some of it wasn't her fault. The girl's gift didn't help. A mind-type talent that enhanced insight and perception, but made her mind prone to spirals of overthinking, burnout, and, worst of all, apathy. Combine that with natural laziness and inherited Lopez stubbornness, and you had a gifted prodigy in theory and a nap enthusiast in practice. Still, enough was enough. "Clara, if you don't get out of bed in the next 10 seconds, I will teleport this mattress into the courtyard," Eva said. "You wouldn't. I have the coordinates saved." Clara opened one eye. Her violet gaze was tired, mildly annoyed, and entirely unconvinced. "You're bluffing." Eva raised one hand. Mana began to crackle. Clara sat up. "Fine," she muttered. "I'll get up. But only because the bear doesn't like wind." Eva exhaled. Victory. Technically. She stepped out, mentally adding threat of public exposure to her parenting arsenal. "And shower," Eva said crisply, in the tone of someone who had long ago learned that compromise with teenagers was a myth perpetuated by parenting books and very naive first-time mothers. "I did yesterday," Clara whined, her voice a croaky protest muffled by the pillow she was trying to disappear into. Unfortunately for her, Eva was immune to both excuses and time-warped logic. "You also ate yesterday, and yet here we are again today." Before Clara could formulate a rebuttal, and it would have been a terrible one. Eva simply walked over, grabbed her daughter like an inconvenient suitcase, and hoisted her up. It might have looked a bit absurd to an outsider, since mother and daughter were practically the same height, but Eva Nightshade's arm strength had once suplexed a rogue chimera during a field trip gone wrong. Clara flailed her limbs like a wet kitten trying to avoid a bath. "No, put me down, this is oppression," she squealed, her legs kicking as mana flared up instinctively, fizzled out immediately. Eva's mana pressed down on Clara's like a celestial boot on a cockroach. Effortlessly dominant. With the grace of a woman who had done this before, Eva slid open the bathroom door with her elbow and deposited her daughter inside the shower with a parental plunk. "Shower," she said, crossing her arms. "Or I'll do it for you." There was a pause. A dangerous pause. "You can clean me?" Clara mumbled, eyes half-lidded in that vaguely unhinged way that made other people mistake her sarcasm for insanity. Eva's brow twitched hard enough to set off a seismic alarm in the next room. A flick, sharp, efficient, and glowing faintly with mana. struck Clara's forehead with pinpoint precision. 10 minutes and one grumpy hair rinse later, Clara finally emerged from the bathroom, trailing steam and dignity in equal amounts. Her long violet hair stuck to the towel she'd thrown over her shoulders, and she looked, for a brief moment, almost alive. The post-shower glow gave her a temporary aura of functionality, and Eva allowed herself a cautious nod of approval. That was, of course, before Clara zombie lurched straight past her and dove headfirst back into bed. "Clara?" Eva said flatly, watching the girl wrap herself in her blankets like a sentient burrito. "I miss Arthur," came the muffled voice from under the covers. Eva paused, exasperation halting mid-step. That name again. Clara was not, by any reasonable definition, a social creature. She didn't do friends. She barely did classmates. But Arthur Nightingale had somehow managed the impossible. He'd lodged himself in her daughter's narrow circle of trust, alongside afternoon naps and exactly one brand of pudding. Eva sighed again, this one far less annoyed and far more maternal. War had stolen away more than time. Arthur was on the front lines of a continental conflict, and Eva could see now, plainly as daylight, that for Clara, that fact didn't sit well. Not because she was afraid he'd die. Clara had full faith in Arthur's ability to stubborn his way through most supernatural threats. No, she just missed him. And for Clara, missing someone was as rare and serious as an eclipse. Chapter 494. Archmage Charlotte, 3. "Why is she here?" Cecilia asked, arms crossed tightly over her chest as she eyed Clara. The girl was currently swaying on her feet, eyelids drooping as though gravity had decided they made excellent weights. Charlotte's lips quirked into an amused smile. "Her mother sent this sleephead to me for some much-needed discipline," she explained, tugging absently at one of her circuit-threaded sleeves. Apparently, she couldn't handle her anymore with all the diplomatic work piling up since the vampire crisis began. As if on cue, Clara's knees buckled. Instead of crashing to the floor, she gently descended onto a shimmering, translucent pillow that materialized beneath her. The pillow hovered a perfect 18 inches off the ground, sustained by her mind aspect gift even as consciousness slipped away from her. Cecilia blinked, then turned to Charlotte with an expression that clearly asked, "Are you serious?" Charlotte merely shrugged, emerald eyes glinting with mischief. "She misses Arthur just like you do, though her attachment is strictly platonic. It's making her even lazier than usual." She gestured between them with a casual flick of her wrist. "You get a solid sparring partner, and I get to fulfill a promise to an old friend. This princess is what we call a win-win deal." Cecilia considered this. Despite Clara's narcoleptic tendencies, she was undeniably powerful. A six-circle mage whose combat capabilities were well documented. The daughter of Eva Lopez, rank 11, Clara had inherited her mother's mind aspect talent. "Fine," Cecilia conceded, uncrossing her arms. "But if she sleeps through training, I'm not responsible for what happens." "Oh, she won't sleep through the important parts," Charlotte said with a knowing smile that sent a chill down Cecilia's spine. "Now, shall we begin?" The training grounds in the Tower of Magic were nothing like the manicured gardens of the Imperial Palace. Here, the earth was scorched in patterns that spoke of countless magical duels. Barrier runes inscribed into stone pillars surrounded the area, designed to contain even the most volatile spellwork. The air itself felt charged, as though the very molecules were waiting for the command to ignite. Clara, now miraculously awake, though her eyes remained half-lidded, stood across from Cecilia. She yawned widely, covering her mouth with a delicate hand. "Don't hold back on my account, princess," she mumbled, blinking slowly. "I function better under pressure." Charlotte stood at the edge of the training circle, her posture casual but her gaze sharp. "Today, we're focusing on six-circle spell construction and containment. Both of your gifts give you tremendous offensive capabilities, but raw power without control is just glorified property damage." She flicked her fingers, and a series of glowing magical circles appeared in the air between them. "Cecilia, your witchcraft turns conventional spellwork unpredictable. Clara, your sorcerer's rite gives you elemental versatility few mages can match. But neither of you has mastered the fine art of not killing everyone in the room when you cut loose." Cecilia bristled at the criticism, but couldn't deny its truth. Her gift painted her mana crimson, infusing her spells with a chaotic, supernatural quality that often exceeded her expectations, and sometimes, her control. "Begin with a standard three-circle defensive formation," Charlotte instructed. "Then gradually build to 6. I want to see your thought processes, not just the final product." Cecilia closed her eyes, concentrating on the familiar patterns. 3 circles of mana formed before her, crimson light that pulsed with her heartbeat. The first circle controlled intensity, the second direction, and the third purpose. Simple, clean, fundamental. Across from her, Clara's approach looked entirely different. Her eyes had opened fully now, a startling alertness replacing her earlier drowsiness. She extended one hand, and 6 distinct colored circles materialized around her arm. Yellow, green, red, cyan, blue, and purple. Fire, earth, water, wind, lightning, and ice respectively. The colors swirled and merged around her like a prismatic cloak, the sorcerer's right gift activating in its full glory. "Clara," Charlotte called out, her voice sharp with warning. "I said start with 3. "Sorry," Clara replied, not sounding sorry at all. Force of habit. The 6 circles collapsed into 3, a simplified version focusing on wind, water, and fire. The sudden control in her movements was jarring compared to her earlier lethargy. It was like watching a different person inhabit the same body. "Impressive transition," Charlotte noted. "Now, both of you, add the 4th circle, the circle of resonance." Cecilia concentrated, drawing on her magical education. The 4th circle was where spellwork began to evolve from basic to complex, where the mage's intent had to align perfectly with their technique. She formed the circle of resonance, watching as her crimson mana became deeper, richer, almost burgundy as the spell's complexity increased. Clara added her 4th circle with fluid grace, the colors shifting as she incorporated lightning into her formation. The air around her crackled with potential energy. "Good," Charlotte said, walking around them in a slow circle. The 5th, the circle of evolution. This was where things always became tricky for Cecilia. The 5th circle required the mage to anticipate how the spell would evolve once cast, to build in parameters for growth and adaptation. Her witchcraft gift made this particularly challenging, as her spells had a tendency to develop in unexpected ways. She gritted her teeth, forming the 5th circle with meticulous care. The crimson light began to pulse erratically, small tendrils of darkness weaving through it like veins. "You're fighting your gift," Charlotte observed, stopping beside her. "Don't try to force it into conventional patterns. Your witchcraft wants chaos. Give it controlled chaos. Think of it as directing a river rather than building a canal." Cecilia nodded, adjusting her approach. Instead of trying to force her mana into rigid structures, she allowed it to flow more naturally while establishing boundaries for that flow. The result was immediate. Her 5 circles stabilized, the crimson light swirling with purpose rather than rebellion. "Better," Charlotte said, then turned to Clara. "And you, stop holding back. I can see you're keeping your elements segregated. The 5th circle is about integration, not compartmentalization." Clara sighed dramatically but complied. Her 5 circles began to blend at the edges, the colors mixing in complex patterns that changed moment by moment. The prismatic cloak around her grew brighter, the individual elements strengthening as they influenced each other. "Now for the 6th circle, the circle of transcendence," Charlotte announced. "This is where your spell becomes more than the sum of its parts, where intent transforms into reality." Cecilia focused intensely, drawing on everything she'd learned over the years. The 6th circle was about transformation, taking the groundwork laid by the previous 5 and elevating it to something greater. Her crimson mana flared brilliantly as she completed the formation, the 6 circles interlocking in a complex pattern that hummed with power. Clara's 6 circles merged into a single, shimmering aura that encompassed her entire body. Each element remained distinct yet connected, flowing into one another in an endless cycle of creation and transformation. "Excellent," Charlotte said, satisfaction evident in her voice. "Now make them dance." The cryptic instruction hung in the air for a moment before Cecilia understood. This wasn't just about forming the circles, it was about manipulating them, adapting them in real time. Charlotte clapped her hands, and a dozen spectral targets appeared around the training ground. "Hit them, but adapt your spellwork between each target. No repetition." Clara moved first, her drowsiness completely gone now. With a flick of her wrist, she sent a spiral of fire and lightning toward the first target, the elements twisting around each other before striking with precision. For the second, she transitioned seamlessly to earth and water, creating crystals that shattered on impact. Not to be outdone, Cecilia unleashed her own assault. Her crimson spellwork manifested as writhing shadows for the first target, then shifted to something like solidified lightning for the second. Each spell was unique, unpredictable, marked by the supernatural chaos of her witchcraft gift. "Good," Charlotte called out. "Now against each other. Non-lethal only, please. I just had this place renovated." Cecilia turned to face Clara, who had dropped into a combat stance that looked incongruous with her usually sleepy demeanor. There was nothing drowsy about her now. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, her posture perfect. "Begin," Charlotte commanded. Clara struck first, her 6 elements surging forward in a wave of prismatic energy. Cecilia countered with a crimson barrier that absorbed the assault, then twisted the energy back into a counterattack. The exchange was breathtaking, Clara's elemental versatility against Cecilia's supernatural chaos. Where Clara was methodical, precise, each element flowing perfectly into the next, Cecilia was unpredictable, her spells defying conventional magical theory. "Cecilia," Charlotte called out as she deflected a particularly aggressive ice spike. "Stop trying to overpower her. Your gift isn't about brute force. It's about transformation. Change the rules. Don't just break them." Cecilia gritted her teeth, adjusting her approach. Instead of meeting Clara's elemental barrage head-on, she began to twist and redirect it, infusing the elements with her own chaotic energy before sending them back. "Better," Charlotte encouraged. "Clara, your transitions are too predictable. A six-circle mage should be impossible to anticipate." Clara nodded, her expression focused despite the sweat beading on her brow. Her next combination came without warning, earth to lightning to ice in a split second, bypassing the expected progression entirely. The spar continued, growing more intense with each exchange. Cecilia found herself genuinely challenged, forced to adapt constantly as Clara's elemental attacks came from increasingly unexpected angles. Despite her irritation with the girl's normally lethargic demeanor, she couldn't deny Clara's combat prowess was exceptional. "Enough. Well done, both of you. Different approaches, different strengths, both effective in their own way." Cecilia lowered her hands, her crimson mana fading. Across from her, Clara's prismatic cloak dissipated, and almost immediately her eyelids began to droop again. "Is she going to sleep now?" Cecilia asked incredulously. Charlotte chuckled. "Her gift consumes enormous amounts of energy. The drowsiness is a side effect, her body's way of conserving resources." As if to confirm this, Clara yawned widely, the sharpness in her eyes already fading back to sleepy indifference. "Good match," she mumbled, another translucent pillow forming beneath her as she sank down onto it. Cecilia shook her head in disbelief. "Unbelievable. What you both demonstrated today was impressive," Charlotte said, gathering their attention. "But also revealing. Cecilia, your witchcraft gives you tremendous potential, but you're still fighting against its nature rather than working with it. And Clara, your elemental transitions need to be less predictable. A skilled opponent will identify your patterns." She stepped into the center of the training ground, her own mana manifesting as a subtle shimmer in the air. Six-circle magic isn't just about power or complexity. It's about harmony between intent and execution, between control and creativity. She formed her own 6 circles with effortless grace, the formation so perfect it seemed to exist in more dimensions than the eye could perceive. "Tomorrow, we'll focus on spontaneous adaptations. The battlefield rarely gives you time to think through your constructions." She dismissed her spell with a casual wave. "For now, rest. Recover." And Cecilia. Her emerald eyes locked onto the princess with unnerving intensity. "Stop comparing yourself to Arthur. Your paths are different, but they may yet converge if you master yourself first." With that cryptic parting statement, Charlotte turned and walked toward the house, leaving Cecilia standing beside a now softly snoring Clara, whose hovering pillow gently bobbed in the afternoon breeze. Cecilia glanced down at her crimson-tinged hands, then at the peaceful face of her unlikely training partner. Perhaps this arrangement wasn't going to be quite as unbearable as she'd initially thought. Chapter 495, Lumirin City, 1. I exhaled, pushing my damp hair back with the kind of dramatic flair normally reserved for shampoo commercials or seasoned war heroes, which, in this case, I technically was. Below me, sprawled in an undignified mess of limbs and ash-stained robes, lay the corpse of a vampire elder. Well, formerly. Now he was just a pile of expensive clothing and bad decisions. First one since Lazarus. Serafina landed beside me with the grace of someone who had grown up dodging arrows, expectations, and traditional elven etiquette. Her sword dripped with black blood, and her eyes, ice blue, sharp as shattered glass, immediately flicked to the bite mark just beneath my jaw. "He tried," I said, already anticipating the accusation. "Didn't get far. Miasma's gone, burned it out with pure light." That seemed to satisfy her for a half-second, which was about as long as Serafina ever allowed herself to be satisfied before concern reloaded itself like a well-oiled crossbow. "He was an elder, Arthur," she said quietly. "A real one. Not a third-rate blood junkie in a fancy cape. You just killed him," I said, grinning. "He was weaker than Lazarus anyway." Her mouth opened, presumably to chastise me. Unfortunately for her, I scooped her up mid-thought. Princess Carrie. Classic. Effective. And terribly enjoyable, judging by the red tint now bleeding into her elven ears. She made a sound that might have been the beginning of a protest or the dying squeak of a flustered half-elf. "We deserve a break," I declared, ignoring her embarrassment entirely as I adjusted my hold and gave the side of her waist a quick squeeze. She squirmed. It was adorable. Eventually, she gave in, like always, and wrapped her arms around my neck, settling her head against my chest. I carried her in no particular direction except away from battle and toward smug victory. It was a good path. "We're getting deployed," she murmured after a moment. "Another city?" "You didn't tell me," I said, raising an eyebrow. "I wanted to wait until this mission was over." Her voice lowered. "And some will be there. That name. A name with the weight of unwanted family dinners and constant comparisons. Son Zenith. Her older adopted brother. For years her senior and built like a monument to elven arrogance. Less talented than Serafina but more widely recognized because Serafina hadn't bloomed yet, unlike him. Serafina looked down as she said it. Her fingers clutched the fabric of my jacket a little tighter. At least he won't be there long, she added. Quiet. Too quiet. I stopped walking. Look at me, I said. She didn't. So I just held her tighter. You're not someone who should be afraid of someone like him. You're Serafina of Mount Hua. The girl who killed a vampire priest without blinking. He doesn't scare you. Not anymore. She looked up then. Her voice, when it came, was small and cracked. Thank you, my prince. I chuckled. That's a dangerous nickname to give me. I might start demanding crowns. She nuzzled in closer, refusing to look at anyone or anything else, and I took the long path back to camp just below the base of the Mount Hua sect. The soldiers saluted. Some smirked. Others just looked confused. Before we reached the gates, Serafina slid out of my arms, feet touching ground with practiced grace and visible embarrassment. I can walk, you know, she muttered, glancing at the crowd. But you're a princess, I offered helpfully. This is what you deserve. She glared. I grinned. We both knew I was going to do it again. Arthur. Sarah. The voice belonged to Masterly, who strolled up to us with all the urgency of a man who'd seen one too many world-ending catastrophes and was unimpressed by this one. He wore the look of a man balancing the paperwork of a sect, a war, and a generation of emotionally repressed prodigies, not necessarily in that order. With Mo Zenith away fighting at the front lines against vampires, Masterly had been left in charge of Mount Hua. Deputy sect leader, full-time grumbler, part-time babysitter. We're back, I said, trying for cheerful and mostly managing blood-soaked and battle-hardened. Killed a vampire elder. Lee didn't flinch. Didn't raise a brow. Didn't even make a sound of impressed inhalation. I figured, he said, waving one hand like I'd just reported I'd picked up groceries. If it had been a tougher one, you'd have retreated. You wouldn't risk Serafina. Which was true. Painfully obviously true. The sort of truth that didn't need to be said, but Lee said it anyway because that was his entire personality. Wisdom, flat tone, the occasional metaphor, and hair that never moved. I nodded slightly, suppressing the urge to say something sarcastic. Lee wasn't wrong, and besides, I had Luna for that. The Qilin in my head was better than any scout or radar. She could assess danger levels with alarming precision and occasional smugness. Lee turned to business. You're being redeployed. New city. Not front lines, too quiet for that now. We've reclaimed ground, so we're moving son somewhere his brand of drama is more useful. Serafina's eyes flicked toward him, her face still as calm as moonlight. But Lee had known her since she was small enough to hide behind his robes and tug at his sleeves for extra sweets. He didn't need expressions to read her. He just knew. Having the princess of Mount Hua command the city, he added gently, makes more sense. She nodded. Of course she did. The perfect disciple, always carrying the weight of 1,000 expectations with her back as straight as her blade. But there was a flicker, just a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Lee caught it. Didn't say anything, just reached out and ruffled her silver hair like she was still that little girl trying to memorize every scroll in the sect library before bedtime. She didn't resist. She closed her eyes for a moment and let him. It wasn't much. But it was more than enough. Which city? I asked, already mentally mapping the reclaimed territories in my head. Lumirin, Lee replied. Itzy. The jewel of the eastern province, Serafina finished softly. That explained the hesitation. Lumirin wasn't just any city, it was a cultural landmark. Lee nodded. You leave at dawn. Get some rest. Both of you. His eyes lingered on the bite mark on my neck. And have that looked at, Arthur. Vampire elder venom is nothing to play with, even with your unique constitution. With that, he turned and strode back toward the main hall, his robes billowing behind him despite the complete absence of wind. I was convinced he'd mastered some secret technique solely for dramatic exits. Come on, I said, nudging Serafina gently. Let's get cleaned up. The residential area of Mount Hua reserved for honored disciples and important guests was a stark contrast to the battlefield we'd left behind. Serafina, as the princess of Mount Hua and daughter of sect leader Mo Zenith, was naturally given one of the finest guest pavilions, a beautifully constructed building with curved eaves and moonstone inlays that caught the evening light. My quarters were adjacent to hers, separated by an ornate garden with a small koi pond close enough to respond if needed, but with propriety firmly maintained. The servants had already prepared everything, fresh robes laid out, steaming baths drawn, and medicinal herbs set beside porcelain bowls for treating battle wounds. The luxury felt almost jarring after weeks of field tents and hasty camps. I sank into the cedar-scented bath in my chambers, letting the hot water soothe muscles that had been tensed for combat for too long. The bite wound on my neck, stung when it touched the water, but I could feel it healing already, another quirk of my unique constitution, as Lee put it. By morning, it would be nothing more than a faint mark. After bathing, I changed into the clean robes provided and examined my reflection in the polished bronze mirror. I looked less like a warrior and more like what I supposedly was, an honored disciple of Mount Hua, though I suspected most disciples didn't have quite so many scars. A soft knock at my door drew my attention. Enter, I called, expecting perhaps a servant with evening tea. Instead, Serafina stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind her. She had bathed as well, her silver hair still damp at the ends, falling loose around her shoulders. She wore simple sleeping robes of pale blue silk, elegant but understated. Without her armor and with her hair down, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Less like the legendary half-elven warrior princess and more like the girl who still sometimes had nightmares about her childhood in the sect. "I thought you would be resting," I said, surprised to see her in my quarters. "I tried," she replied, her voice soft. Her eyes met mine briefly before sliding away. "But I want to spend time with you." I understood immediately. The formality of separate chambers meant nothing on nights like these, nights when the weight of tomorrow pressed too heavily to bear alone. We sat in silence for a while, sipping tea and listening to the gentle sounds of night settling over Mount Hua, distant chimes from the meditation pavilion, the soft splash of koi in the garden pond, the whisper of wind through ancient pines. Eventually, Serafina set down her empty cup and rose, moving to the window. The moonlight silvered her hair and caught the delicate elven features of her profile. She looked ethereal, untouchable, and yet I could see the weariness in the line of her shoulders, the vulnerability in her clasped hands. We sat in silence, just sipping tea before it was time. Serafina got up to leave, but I grabbed her hand. "Stay with me?" I asked. Her cheeks reddened slightly as she nodded. The bed in my chambers was large enough for two with room to spare, another luxury of Mount Hua hospitality compared to our usual field accommodations. I took one side, and after a moment's hesitation, Serafina slipped beneath the covers on the other, maintaining a careful distance between us. But in the darkness, that distance gradually disappeared. As if drawn by some inevitable gravity, she moved closer until her head rested against my shoulder, her arm draped lightly across my chest. I wrapped my arm around her, feeling the tension in her muscles gradually release as she settled against me. Her silver hair spilled across my chest, cool and soft as moonlight. "Do you think I can do it?" she whispered. "Command Lumirin, I mean. It's not just any city." "I think," I said, tracing slow circles on her back, "that you could command the sun to change its course and it would seriously consider the request." That earned me a soft laugh, a rare and precious sound. "You're ridiculous," she murmured, but she pressed closer. "And yet completely correct." We lay in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds our breathing and the distant murmur of the camp settling down for the night. Gradually, I felt Serafina's body grow heavier against mine as sleep began to claim her. Chapter 496, Lumirin City 2. Dawn came too quickly, painting Mount Hua's peaks in hues of gold and amber. I found Serafina already gone from my chambers when I woke, the only evidence of her presence a faint scent of jasmine lingering on the pillow beside mine. The courtyard buzzed with activity by the time I arrived. 20 disciples stood in perfect formation, each wearing the distinctive pale blue robes of Mount Hua with silver cloud patterns at the hems. 3 elders stood at the head of the formation, Elder Lin with her trademark silver hairpins that doubled as throwing weapons, Elder Zhao, whose seemingly frail appearance belied his mastery of the Mount Hua sword technique, and Elder Wei, a taciturn man with a perpetual frown who specialized in barrier formations. We stood with them, issuing final instructions. His eyes flicked to me briefly, the smallest nod acknowledging my presence. Serafina appeared last, and the entire courtyard seemed to still. She had transformed overnight from the vulnerable woman in my chambers to the princess of Mount Hua in full regalia. Her armor gleamed silver and blue, the Mount Hua crest emblazoned across her breastplate. Her hair was intricately braided with silver threads and small sapphires that matched her eyes. A half-elven circlet, her mother's, I knew, rested on her brow. "She cleans up nicely," Luna admitted. "Even I'm impressed." It was the first time in a long time that Luna spoke, and it was an ordinary comment. Evolvus hung at my side, the ancient-grade artifact sword I got from Eva Lopez. Serafina's own sword, Moonfall, was equally legendary, an heirloom passed down through her mother's line for generations. "Disciples of Mount Hua," Li announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard without effort. "Today you embark on a mission of great significance. Lumirin awaits its rightful guardians. You will serve under Princess Serafina and Arthur, and you will bring honor to Mount Hua through your conduct." The disciples bowed as one. "We serve Mount Hua with our lives," they intoned. "The transport awaits," Li concluded, gesturing toward the landing platform where 3 sleek airships bearing the Mount Hua insignia hovered, their engines emitting the soft hum of advanced mana technology. As we boarded the lead airship, I positioned myself at Serafina's side, not too close to raise eyebrows, but close enough that she would know I was there. "Ready?" I asked quietly as the engines increased their pitch, preparing for departure. Serafina's eyes met mine briefly. "As I'll ever be." "How romantic," Luna commented dryly. "You two really should write poetry." The journey to Lumirin would take most of the day. The airships cut through the sky at impressive speeds, but the eastern province was vast, and Lumirin lay near its heart, nestled in the embrace of the Azure Mountains. Elder Lin approached us midway through the journey, her movements graceful despite the occasional turbulence. "Princess," she said, bowing slightly to Serafina. "I helped govern the city. It will be a profound honor to see it restored to its former glory under your command." Serafina inclined her head. "Your experience will be invaluable, Elder Lin. I would appreciate any insights you might have about the city's defensive needs." "Of course." Elder Lin's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, studied Serafina for a moment. As Elder Lin moved away to confer with the other elders, Serafina turned to the viewing window, watching the landscape unfold beneath us. It was mid-afternoon when one of the disciples called out, "Lumirin, approaching from the east." We moved to the forward viewing port and there it was, rising from the mountainside like a dream carved in stone. Serafina had described it, but words hadn't done it justice. Lumirin was built on 7 massive terraces cut into the mountain itself, each terrace flowing into the next in a cascading display of architectural harmony. The buildings were constructed from a rare pale stone that seemed to capture and hold the light, giving the entire city a soft luminescence even in broad daylight. Hanging gardens draped from every level, creating vertical waterfalls of greenery and colorful blooms. At the base of the mountain, a crescent-shaped lake reflected the city above, its surface dotted with floating platforms that I assumed were the floating gardens Serafina had mentioned. "It's as beautiful as you described," I murmured. "More," Serafina whispered. "They've already begun restoration." She was right. Even from a distance, I could see scaffolding on some buildings and workers moved about like tiny ants across the terraces. The vampire occupation had clearly left its mark. Some structures showed signs of damage, and one entire section of the 3rd terrace appeared to be under major reconstruction. The airships descended toward a large landing platform on the highest terrace. As we drew closer, I could make out a welcoming party assembled there, soldiers in their distinctive red and gold uniforms, local officials in traditional attire, and at the front, a tall figure whose posture virtually radiated self-importance. "Son," Serafina said, her voice so low I barely caught it. The airships docked with practiced precision and the ramps extended. Protocol dictated that the elders would disembark first, followed by Serafina as the ranking Mount Hua representative, then myself, and finally the disciples. Elder Wei turned to us. "Princess, it would be appropriate for you to lead the procession." Serafina nodded, squaring her shoulders almost imperceptibly. "Thank you, Elder Wei." She stepped onto the ramp, sunlight catching the sapphires in her hair and the silver embellishments of her armor. I followed a respectful 2 paces behind, Evalvis at my side. The elders flanked us, with the disciples forming a perfect formation behind. Sun Zenith stood at the center of the welcoming committee, and I had to admire his sense of presentation. He wore armor that combined aesthetics with imperial military design, all gleaming white and gold, with an azure cape that billowed dramatically in the mountain breeze. His black hair was pulled back in a warrior's tail, emphasizing the sharp angles of his features. A golden circlet rested on his brow, similar enough to Serafina's to remind everyone of their connection, yet distinctly different to emphasize his separate lineage. His smile was perfect, practiced, and didn't reach his eyes. "Sister," he called. "Lumirin welcomes its princess home at last." Serafina inclined her head with precise formality. "Brother," she responded in kind. "Mount Hua thanks you for your service in reclaiming this sacred city." They maintained a careful distance, close enough for courtesy, far enough to avoid any actual warmth. "The temperature just dropped 10 degrees, Luna observed. "Ah, family." "And Arthur," Sun said, his eyes sliding to me with the barest hint of calculation. "The prized disciple of Magnus Dracar. I hear your master continues to perform admirably on the front lines. Your reputation grows alongside his." I bowed just slightly, enough to be polite, not enough to suggest deference. "Sun Zenith. Your work here has been admirable." His smile tightened at the corners. He hadn't missed the lack of honorific or formal title. "A tour of the city awaits," Sun announced, turning to include the entire Mount Hua delegation. "I've prepared detailed reports on the restoration efforts, security concerns, and administrative matters. After all, I would not want to leave my dear sister unprepared when I depart tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Serafina's voice betrayed nothing, but I knew her well enough to catch the faint note of surprise. "Indeed," Sun replied, his smile widening. "Father has called me to fight in the front lines and gain back more land we lost." He gestured expansively at the city below. "But fear not, sister. I've left Lumirin in excellent condition for you to maintain." "Did he just?" "Oh, that's rich," Luna said, disbelief painting her voice. The emphasis on the final word was subtle but unmistakable. He was taking credit for the reclamation and restoration, positioning Serafina as merely the caretaker of his accomplishment. I felt a flicker of anger on her behalf, but Serafina's expression remained serene, unruffled. "How thoughtful," she replied, her tone so perfectly balanced between gratitude and dismissal that I had to suppress a smile. "I look forward to building upon the foundation you've established, brother." Something flashed in Sun's eyes, irritation, perhaps at her implication that his work was merely preliminary. But his diplomatic training held, and he simply inclined his head in acknowledgement. "We'll settle in and then begin the formal inspection," Serafina stated, clearly drawing the initial encounter to a close. Sun bowed, a touch too deeply to be entirely sincere. "Of course. My staff awaits your commands. I must attend to preparations for my own departure, but I'll join you for the evening banquet." His eyes flickered between Serafina and me. There's so much to discuss about Lumirin's future. As he turned away, his azure cape swirling dramatically, I caught the calculating glance he cast over his shoulder, measuring our reactions, assessing the dynamics between Serafina and myself. Serafina stood perfectly still, watching her adoptive brother's retreat. Only I noticed the subtle tightening of her fingers around Moonfall's hilt, a gesture so slight it might have been unconscious. Chapter 497, Lumirin City 3. Serafina took control of Lumirin with the same ease a fish takes to water. Her title helped, of course. Princess of Mount Hua wasn't just ceremonial, it carried the kind of weight that made even stubborn officials remember their manners. The day had been a whirlwind of inspections, meetings, and establishing Mount Hua's presence in the reclaimed city. By late afternoon, we were both retreating to our chambers to prepare for the evening's farewell banquet for Sun, an event he had naturally insisted upon before his departure to the Warian. Is it too late to fake a vampire attack? I asked, eyeing the formal attire laid out on my bed with thinly veiled suspicion. Mount Hua had sent appropriate clothing ahead, anticipating the political demands of our position. I snorted, picking up the silk robe. Unlike my usual practical clothing, this was clearly meant for someone with status. Deep midnight blue silk embroidered with silver threads that formed stylized clouds and mountains, the symbols of Mount Hua. The collar was high and formal, the sleeves wider than I preferred but appropriately elegant for the occasion. A knock at the connecting door interrupted my contemplation of how many weapons I could conceivably hide in such clothing. Enter, I called, knowing it would be Serafina. She stepped into the room and I momentarily forgot about the banquet, Sun, and pretty much everything else. She wasn't yet fully dressed, her silver hair was up in an intricate arrangement of braids and loops secured with what looked like carved jade pins, but she wore only a simple white underrobe. I need help with something, she said, seemingly unaware of my momentary mental lapse. There's a formal outer robe that requires a second pair of hands. I followed her back to her chamber where her evening attire was laid out across a carved wooden stand. Unlike my relatively simple ensemble, hers was a complex arrangement of layers that looked like it would require an instruction manual. This is traditional half-elven formal wear, she explained, lifting the outermost robe. It was stunning, pale blue silk that shimmered with silver undertones when it caught the light, embroidered with white blossoms that seemed to float across the fabric. The next 15 minutes involved more complex fabric manipulation than I'd encountered in most combat scenarios. The traditional attire involved multiple layers, each needing to be arranged just so. The innermost was the white robe she already wore, followed by a second layer of pale silver, then a third of blue that was slightly darker than the outer robe. This goes under, then fold this part over, no, the other way, she instructed, guiding my hands through the process. Now the sash needs to be wrapped twice and secured with a jade clasp. By the time we finished, she looked like she had stepped out of an ancient painting. The formal robes accentuated her natural grace, the colors complementing her silver hair and ice blue eyes perfectly. Small jade and silver ornaments hung from her hairpins, tinkling softly when she moved. You look. I searched for an adequate word and failed. I don't think common has the vocabulary for it. A slight smile touched her lips. Your turn, she said. You can't escort me looking like that. My own dressing process was considerably simpler, though Serafina insisted on adjusting the lay of the formal robe across my shoulders and securing the sash herself. There, she said, stepping back to examine her work. Almost presentable. Almost? I raised an eyebrow. She reached up and ran her fingers through my hair, arranging it into something less resembling a battlefield casualty. Now you're presentable. The banquet hall was located on the highest terrace of Lumirin, an open-air pavilion with a retractable crystal roof currently withdrawn to reveal the early evening sky. Lanterns of colored glass hung from delicate silver chains, not yet lit but ready for when darkness fell. The stone tables were arranged in a crescent pattern with the head table positioned to offer the best view of the city below. Musicians were setting up in one corner, their instruments a blend of traditional and modern stringed arras alongside crystal harmonics. Sun was already there when we arrived, holding court among a group of city officials. He had outdone himself for his final appearance. His formal attire consisted of multiple layers of the finest silk in white and gold with an outer robe of deep blue marked with the insignia of the Mount Hua sect. A golden circlet set with sapphires rested on his brow and his black hair was immaculately styled with gold pins. His eyes widened slightly when he caught sight of Serafina, a momentary break in his composure that I found deeply satisfying. Sister, he called, recovering quickly. How lovely you look in traditional attire. I see Mount Hua has spared no expense for your wardrobe. Brother, Serafina inclined her head with perfect poise. Thank you for arranging such a splendid farewell. The least I could do before departing for my new post, he replied, not quite managing to keep the self-satisfaction from his voice. The guests began arriving in earnest then, city officials in their formal best, regional nobles who had managed to survive the vampire occupation and military leaders from both the imperial forces and Mount Hua. The elders from our delegation entered in their formal robes, creating quite the impression with their dignified bearing and the subtle but unmistakable aura of power that surrounded them. We were seated at the head table with Sun at the center, Serafina to his right and me beside her. The elders were distributed strategically throughout the hall, positioned to observe and engage with key officials. The meal was served in the traditional Eastern style, 7 courses representing the 7 terraces of Lumirin, each more exquisite than the last. The first course consisted of delicate crystal cups filled with chilled soup that changed color as it was consumed. The second brought plates of paper-thin pastry wrapped around spiced vegetables and mountain herbs. Sun dominated the conversation, naturally regaling the assembled guests with tales of his heroism during the vampire reclamation. The third terrace presented particular challenges, he said, gesturing with his crystal goblet. The vampire nobles had established quite the foothold there. I personally led the final assault that drove them out. I caught Serafina's eye briefly. We both knew the reality. Sun had coordinated from a safe distance while Mount Hua disciples and imperial soldiers did the actual fighting. But this wasn't the place for corrections. As the fourth course was being served, some kind of seafood harvested from the crescent lake below the city, the musicians began to play. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, combining harmonics with traditional Eastern scales. Ah, Sun said, setting down his goblet. The ceremonial music begins. In Lumiran tradition, the city's leader opens the formal dances. He stood and extended his hand to a nearby noblewoman who blushed and accepted it with obvious pleasure. They moved to the center of the pavilion where a circular area had been left clear of tables. The dance was elegant but relatively simple, formal steps that emphasized grace and precision over complexity or passion. Sun executed it flawlessly, of course, his bearing impeccable as he led his partner through the patterns. Other couples joined them as the music continued. Elder Lin, surprisingly, accepted the hand of one of the regional commanders, moving with unexpected lightness for someone of her venerable age. I knelt before Serafina. May I have the honor of this dance, Your Highness? You may, Serafina replied, taking my hand as I got up. The musicians began a new melody as we took our positions. We began simply enough, circling each other with measured steps, hands barely touching. Then came the first transition, a quick series of turns that required precise timing. Serafina moved like flowing water, her robes swirling around her, the jade ornaments in her hair catching the light. I matched her movements with the ease of long practice. We danced together so many times that our bodies remembered each other's rhythms, anticipating shifts in weight and changes in direction before they happened. As the music swelled, we moved into the most challenging sequence, a series of spins and counter-turns where our hands would connect and separate in rapid succession. Serafina's eyes held mine, a silent communication passing between us that made the complex movements seem effortless. I was dimly aware that other dancers had stopped to watch, but my focus remained entirely on Serafina, the subtle pressure of her fingers against mine guiding each turn, the grace with which she executed each movement, the faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. The final sequence brought us close together, one of my hands at her waist, the other clasping hers as we turned in unison. As the music reached its crescendo, I executed the traditional finishing move, a controlled dip that left Serafina arched gracefully backward, supported by my arm, her silver hair nearly brushing the floor. For a moment, perfect stillness. Then applause broke out around the pavilion. I helped Serafina back to a standing position, noting with satisfaction the tight look on Sun's face. We danced well at court functions before, but never like this, never with this level of synchronization and emotional connection. We bowed to each other and then to the assembled guests before making our way back to the table. Well, Sun said as we reseated ourselves, it seems you've been practicing. How dedicated. All disciplines improve with devotion, Serafina replied serenely. Some things simply grow stronger with time. Chapter 498, Lumiran City 4. The remainder of the banquet proceeded with slightly less of Sun's grandstanding. As the final course was served, delicate pastries filled with sweetened mountain berry cream, he rose to deliver what could only be described as a speech to himself, thinly disguised as a farewell. And so, he concluded after 20 minutes of uninterrupted self-congratulation, I leave Lumiran in capable if inexperienced hands. I have no doubt that my sister will maintain what I have built here and perhaps, with time and proper guidance, even add modest improvements of her own. Serafina rose then, her movement fluid and graceful. The light caught in her silver hair and the pale blue silk of her robes, creating an ethereal effect that made several of the assembled officials straighten unconsciously in their seats. Brother, she said, her voice carrying easily across the pavilion without seeming raised, your contributions to Lumiran's reclamation will not be forgotten. Mount Hua thanks you for preparing the ground upon which we will now build. The subtle emphasis on preparing wasn't lost on Sun, whose smile tightened almost imperceptibly. She had just relegated his entire effort to preliminary work and done it with such diplomatic grace that he couldn't object without seeming petty. Wherein awaits your talents, she continued. May your journey be swift and your service there as memorable as it has been here. A perfect non-compliment wrapped in courtesy. I hid my smile behind my goblet as several of the city officials exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the young woman who would now be governing them. As the evening concluded and guests began to depart, Sun made a point of personally bidding farewell to each important official, clasping hands and speaking in tones just loud enough to ensure everyone heard his promises to keep an eye on things from afar and remain available for guidance should difficulties arise. Finally, as the last of the guests filtered out, Sun approached us at the head table. His smile was perfect, practiced, and didn't reach his eyes. Sister, he said, taking Serafina's hand and bowing over it with theatrical formality. I entrust my city to your care. Our city, she corrected gently, belongs to its people. But I will ensure it prospers. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he maintained the smile. Turning to me, he extended his hand. Arthur, do take care of my sister. She has much to learn about leadership. I clasped his hand firmly, perhaps a touch more firmly than strictly necessary. I have complete faith in her abilities. After all, she's been leading effectively on the battlefield while others coordinated from behind. The barb landed. Sun's smile became downright glacial as he withdrew his hand. Until we meet again, he said, managing to make it sound vaguely like a threat before turning in a swirl of expensive fabric and departing, his personal guards falling in behind him. We watched until he had disappeared through the pavilion's grand archway. Well, I said quietly, that was Exhausting, Serafina finished, the perfect posture she'd maintained all evening softening slightly as she exhaled. After bidding goodnight to the remaining officials and ensuring the elders were satisfied with the security arrangements, we finally made our way back to the central pavilion that would serve as Serafina's residence. The master chambers were a welcome refuge after the political theater of the evening. Spacious but comfortable, with windows overlooking the city below, it felt like stepping out of a formal portrait and back into our own skin. Lumiere glowed in the moonlight, the pale stone capturing and reflecting the light in ways that made the name fitting. "Beautiful city," I said quietly, moving to stand beside Serafina at the window. She nodded, her expression thoughtful as she gazed at the terrace buildings. Strange to finally see it after hearing so much about it. I remained silent as she moved away from the window and began removing the jade pins from her hair, each one carefully placed on a lacquered tray. Her silver hair fell in waves down her back, freed from its formal arrangement. She removed the outer robe next, the pale blue silk carefully folded and laid across a wooden stand. "Help me with this?" she asked, gesturing to the complex fastenings of the second layer. I moved behind her, fingers working to undo the intricate closures. There was something intensely intimate about this. Layer by layer, the formal attire was removed until she wore only the simple white underrobe. The moonlight filtering through the windows turned her silver hair luminous, and I was struck again by how seamlessly she moved between her many roles. "Are you just going to stand there?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. "Maybe," I replied. "The view is rather nice." A hint of color touched her cheeks, visible even in the dim light. She changed into simpler sleeping clothes, though the tension of the day remained evident in the set of her shoulders. I gave in to the impulse I'd been fighting all evening. I crossed the room and scooped her up, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back. "Arthur?" she protested, though her arms moved to encircle my neck. "You've been on your feet all day," I said, carrying her to the large bed that dominated one wall of the chamber. "Playing princess, commanding troops, intimidating locals, and outmaneuvering son. You deserve a rest." "It's my duty," she replied automatically, but the words lacked their usual conviction. "And this is mine," I countered, settling onto the bed with her in my lap. She relaxed against me gradually, her head coming to rest on my shoulder. The scent of night-blooming flowers from the hanging gardens outside mingled with the subtle fragrance she always carried, something clean and faintly sweet, like mountain air after a spring rain. "You're impossible," she murmured, but there was no heat in the words. "I prefer determined," I replied, my lips finding the curve of her jaw. Serafina's hand came up to cup my cheek, turning my face toward hers. "Stubborn," she countered. My mouth moved higher, deliberately brushing the sensitive tip of her ear. "Effective." The effect was immediate and gratifying. Serafina's entire body tensed, a small gasp escaping her lips as her fingers tightened on my shoulders. "Elven ears," I noted, brushing my thumb along the delicate point, "are rather sensitive." You know they are," she managed, her voice strained. "It's not fair." I leaned closer, my breath warm against the sensitive skin. "Who said anything about fair?" She turned in my lap, facing me with eyes that somehow managed to be both dazed and sharp. The moonlight caught in her silver hair, framing her face with a soft glow that emphasized the delicate angles of her half-elven features. "Two can play this game, Arthur," she said, and there was a note in her voice I hadn't heard before, something between a challenge and a promise. Her hands moved to my chest, pushing me back against the headboard. She settled more firmly in my lap, her silver hair falling around us like a curtain that closed out the rest of the world, leaving only this moment, this breath, this heartbeat. Serafina leaned forward, her lips meeting mine with surprising intensity. There was nothing of the formal princess of Mount Hua in this kiss, only Serafina with all her carefully controlled passion finally breaking free. When she finally pulled back, we were both breathing harder. "Not fair indeed," I murmured, my hands settling at her waist. A rare smile curved her lips, transforming her face from merely beautiful to breathtaking. I learned quickly. My thumb traced small circles at her hip, feeling the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric. "We should probably rest. Big day tomorrow." "Probably," she agreed, making no move to leave my lap. Instead, her fingers traced the line of my jaw with deliberate slowness. I couldn't resist. I turned my head slightly and captured the tip of her finger between my teeth, biting gently. Her eyes widened, that lovely flush returning to her cheeks. "Arthur?" I released her finger but maintained eye contact. "Yes, princess?" She made a frustrated sound, half growl and half sigh. "You're impossible." "You mentioned that already," I pointed out, enjoying the play of emotions across her usually controlled features. "Running out of adjectives?" Instead of answering, she kissed me again, harder this time. Her body pressed against mine, familiar yet somehow new in this moonlit chamber. I leaned forward, my lips finding the sensitive point of her ear once more. "Now, about these ears." Her body shivered against me, her composure dissolving beneath the focused attention. Small, breathless sounds escaped her lips as I continued exploring this particular weakness, alternating between gentle breaths and light touches, learning what made her gasp and what made her melt. After about 15 minutes, I pulled back to look at her, cheeks flushed, breathing uneven, silver hair tumbled around her shoulders. In that moment, with her guard completely lowered, she looked almost vulnerable and impossibly precious. "You should take a shower," I suggested with deliberate casualness. Her eyes narrowed, though the effect was somewhat undermined by her breathlessness. "You're terrible," she informed me. I grinned. "Strategic," I corrected and pulled her back into my arms. She settled against me with a soft sigh, her head tucked beneath my chin. We stayed that way for a long while, the silence comfortable between us, broken only by the distant sounds of the city settling into night and the steady rhythm of our breathing gradually synchronizing. Eventually, she did take that shower, and I took mine after her. When I emerged, she was already in bed, her silver hair spread across the pillow, gleaming in the moonlight that streamed through the windows. I slid in beside her, and she immediately shifted closer, seeking my warmth. Her head found its place on my shoulder, her arm draped across my chest, her legs tangling with mine. We should sleep, she murmured, though her fingers traced patterns on my skin that suggested sleep wasn't her immediate priority. We should, I agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. She tilted her face up, capturing my lips in a slower, gentler kiss than before. When she pulled back, her eyes were heavy-lidded but still alert. Thank you, she said softly. For what? Being here. Being you. She settled back against me. For making this place feel like somewhere I belong. I tightened my arm around her, understanding the weight of those words from someone who had always existed between worlds, not fully elven, not fully human, caught between Mount Hua's traditions and the modern world's demands. Always, I promised. Chapter 499, Lumirin City, 5. Dawn crept over Lumirin, bathing the pale stone in soft golden light. I woke to find Serafina already up, seated by the window with a small tea service, watching the city come alive below. She'd pulled her silver hair into a loose braid that hung over one shoulder and wore a simple robe of pale blue, comfort rather than formality for once. How long have you been up? I asked, stretching as I joined her. Not long. She handed me a cup of steaming tea. The city is beautiful in the morning light. Below, Lumirin was stirring to life. Market vendors set up stalls on the fourth terrace, their colorful awnings bright against the pale stone. Disciples from our delegation were visible on the training platforms of the fifth terrace, their morning exercises creating a synchronized dance of movement against the backdrop of the rising sun. What's the plan for today? I asked. Serafina set down her cup. Nothing. I raised an eyebrow. Nothing? Nothing official, she clarified. The elders suggested I take a day to explore the city properly without formal escorts or obligations. To get a feel for it. She glanced at me. Would you care to join me? A day off. I feigned shock. The princess of Mount Hua taking leisure time? Has the world ended while I slept? She tossed a cushion at my head, which I caught easily. Apparently exploring one's new command is considered strategic reconnaissance, not leisure. Ah, of course. I nodded solemnly. And I suppose eating at the famous floating restaurants on the lake would be cultural intelligence gathering? Precisely. A full smile now. And visiting the legendary crystal gardens of the second terrace would be botanical research. Essential knowledge for a city commander, I agreed. We dressed casually by our standards, though neither of us would dream of venturing out unarmed. Evolvus hung at my side, its weight reassuring against my hip. Serafina wore Moonfall in a simple sheath across her back, the legendary sword nearly invisible beneath her outer robe but always within reach. The city felt different without the weight of official inspection. We wandered the terraces at our own pace, stopping to examine anything that caught our interest. On the sixth terrace, artisans worked with the luminescent stone native to the region, carving delicate figurines and jewelry that caught the light like captured moonbeams. For you, princess, I said, purchasing a small hairpin shaped like a crescent moon from an elderly craftsman whose eyes widened in recognition as we approached his stall. This isn't necessary, she murmured, though she accepted the gift with careful hands. Consider it research into local craftsmanship, I replied. Very strategic. The old artisan bowed deeply. An honor to serve Mount Hua's princess, he said. My family has worked the moonstone for 17 generations. It's beautiful work, Serafina replied, examining the pin. The man beamed with pride. If I may? He gestured to her hair. Serafina hesitated only briefly before nodding. The artisan carefully slid the pin into her braid, positioning it so the crescent caught the light perfectly. There, he said, stepping back. Now you truly look like the Lady of Lumirin. We continued our exploration, making our way down to the famous floating gardens on the Crescent Lake. Small boats ferried visitors between floating platforms where exotic plants from across the eastern continent grew in carefully tended arrangements. We settled on a bench beneath the willow, watching the play of light on the water. Somewhere in the distance, a musician was playing a string instrument, the notes drifting across the lake like scattered petals. This is nice, Serafina said after a while, her head resting against my shoulder. Unfamiliar, but nice. The legendary princess of Mount Hua, defeated by the concept of relaxation. She elbowed me lightly. I'm relaxing. See? Completely relaxed, even in war. Progress, I conceded, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. We stayed that way for some time, listening to the distant music and watching light motes dance across the surface of the lake. Serafina gradually relaxed against me, her breathing slowing to match the gentle rhythm of the water lapping against the floating platform. When hunger finally drove us from our sanctuary, we found a small restaurant on the edge of the lake. Unlike the formal banquet of the previous night, this was simple, hearty fare, steamed dumplings filled with local mushrooms, bowls of spiced noodle soup, and fresh lake fish grilled with herbs. I could get used to this, I said, watching Serafina savor a bite of fish. The great commander, enjoying simple pleasures. Don't get too accustomed to it, she warned, though her eyes were light. Tomorrow the real work begins. The third terrace reconstruction needs oversight and the defensive formations need reviewing. But not today, I reminded her. No, she agreed. Not today. After our meal, we climbed back up to the fourth terrace to browse the market stalls. Merchants offered everything from exotic spices to intricate mechanical toys powered by simple mana crystals. Serafina was drawn to a display of ancient texts, engaging the bookseller in an animated discussion about pre-imperial Eastern literature. I wandered a few stalls away, examining a collection of carved wooden practice weapons. The craftsmanship was exceptional, each piece balanced perfectly despite being made from a single block of wood. Arthur. Luna's voice in my mind was uncharacteristically serious. Something's wrong. I stiffened. Luna rarely used that tone. What is it? I'm not sure yet, but... She paused. The air just changed. Like before a storm, but darker. Colder. I casually scanned our surroundings, one hand drifting to Evolvus's hill. Nothing seemed immediately amiss, but I had long ago learned to trust Luna's instincts. Beautiful work, I commented to the stall-keeper, maintaining an appearance of normalcy while continuing my scan. You have a good eye for balance. It's coming from the central pavilion, Luna continued, her mental voice tight with tension. Something powerful. A chill crept up my spine, the unmistakable sensation that preceded vampire encounters. Not the common foot soldiers we'd dispatched countless times, but something ancient. Something that made even Luna, normally flippant in the face of danger, fall solemnly silent. I glanced toward Serafina, catching her eye. She picked up on my tension immediately, giving a nearly imperceptible nod before gracefully concluding her conversation with the bookseller. Find anything interesting? She asked casually as she joined me, though her hand had already shifted to a position where she could draw Moonfall in an instant. Nothing worth lingering for, I replied, the code phrase we'd established years ago for potential threats. Perhaps we should check on the elders. As we made our way back toward the central pavilion, the sensation grew stronger. The late afternoon sky seemed to darken prematurely, clouds gathering with unnatural speed. The usual bustle of the city continued around us, citizens unaware of the malevolence I could feel pulsing from the direction of our destination. This is bad, Arthur, Luna said, all trace of her usual sarcasm gone. This feels like that time in the Northern Wastes. My blood ran cold. The Northern Wastes incident had involved a vampire elder who had nearly killed both Serafina and me despite our combined efforts. If Luna was making that comparison. Vampire, I murmured to Serafina, low enough that only she could hear. Powerful one. Possibly elder class or higher. Her steps didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. At the pavilion? Yes. Luna feels it. Serafina nodded once, sharp and decisive. The elders are there. We increased our pace, not quite running but moving with purposeful urgency. The dread sensation intensified with each step toward the central pavilion. By the time we reached the base of the stairs leading up to the main entrance, it felt like wading through ice water. The usual guards were at their posts, but something was wrong. They stood too still, their eyes glazed and unfocused. Enthralled, Serafina whispered. I nodded grimly. Vampire enthrallment, a technique only the most powerful could manage over trained warriors. We moved past the unresponsive guards, hands now openly on our weapons. The large doors to the pavilion stood open, apparently normal except for the faint miasmic residue that clung to the threshold like morning dew, invisible to normal sight but clear to my enhanced perception. Careful, Luna warned. Whatever is in there, it's ancient. And waiting. We entered the pavilion cautiously, senses heightened. The main hall was empty, though the usual staff could be seen frozen in place along the walls, entranced like the guards outside. Silence hung heavy in the air, not the peaceful quiet of an empty building, but the tense silence of a predator about to strike. Something's wrong, Serafina said, drawing Moonfall in a smooth, silent motion. The blade gleamed with a cold light that pushed back against the creeping shadows. I unsheathed Evolvus, the ancient-grade artifact thrumming with responsive energy as it sensed the nearby threat. We moved deeper into the pavilion toward the council chamber where the elders would typically be at this hour. The doors were closed but not sealed, another irregularity. Protocol dictated they remain open unless a private session was in progress, in which case formal seals would be applied. As we approached, the sensation of dread became overwhelming. My every instinct screamed danger, and Evolvus grew almost hot in my grip, reacting to the powerful malevolence beyond the door. Arthur, wait, Luna began, but it was too late. The doors swung open of their own accord, revealing the council chamber beyond. Inside, the scene froze my blood. The elders, all three of them, hung suspended in midair, held by invisible forces, their faces contorted in silent agony. Elder Wei's chest bore a gaping wound, blood dripping slowly to form a complex sigil on the floor below. The other two still lived, but barely, their life force visibly draining into the growing pattern of blood. And in the center of it all stood a woman of impossible beauty and terrible presence. Her skin was pale as death, her eyes ancient and cold as the void between stars. She wore a gown of deepest crimson that seemed to flow like liquid around her slender form. When she smiled, revealing delicate fangs, the temperature in the room plummeted. Vampire Ancestor. Chapter 500, Lemurin City 6. Vampire Ancestor. Well, that explained the slight tickling at the back of my neck that had felt suspiciously like dread wrapped in velvet. No wonder I couldn't sense her properly, Luna muttered in my head, her voice edged with something close to actual alarm. She's low immortal rank, Arthur. Is she injured? I asked, hopeful in the same way someone might be hopeful when their enemy had a limp but was still driving a tank. Yes, Luna replied. She took out 3 elders. Took a bit out of her. But even drained, she's on a different level. We're talking about someone who danced with Magnus Dracar and lived to tell about it. Of course she was. Because why not? The universe didn't like me that much. Even with Serafina at my side, our duo had only just started reliably murdering high ascendant ranked elders plural, yes, but only with excellent teamwork and a hefty helping of divine luck. The being in front of us wasn't just higher on the food chain. She'd opened a new restaurant, set up a table, and was about to eat us for lunch. I glanced quickly at the suspended elders. Elder Wei was clearly beyond help, but Lin and Zhao still had faint mana signatures. If we could disrupt the ritual quickly enough, they might survive. Might being the operative word when facing an immortal rank vampire. No visible weapon, and her mana signature was crystalline clear, mental type, probably some rare mind aspect specialization. If my guess was right, that put her squarely in the 8-circle mage who plays with brains like most people fiddle with puzzle cubes category. She floated forward without actually doing any of the things that involved feet or physics. Her blood-red gown rippled like liquid around her slender form, defying gravity with the same casual disdain with which she regarded us. Her voice dripped charm and murder in equal measure. Ah! The princess of Mount Hua and Dracar's little protege. How perfect! Her smile was a crescent of perfect ivory marred only by the delicate points of her fangs. Your brother was quite helpful in arranging this meeting. The doors slammed shut behind us with a noise that said finality more than any speech ever could. Great! No exits. No backup. Just us and the vampire who was casually radiating superiority like an overclocked space heater of doom. Reinforcements? Maybe. If they arrived. If they were close. If they didn't immediately die. In other words, not soon enough. Erebus, I thought sharply. Yes, master, came the reply, smooth and crisp like steel on silk. Bones burst from my shadow like eager hounds. Not just any bones, mind you. Blood wyvern bones lovingly arranged into a full suit of bone armor with the efficiency of a murderous interior decorator. My lich was good like that. The vampire watched the transformation with a glint of amusement. A lich made of blood wyvern's bones, she said thoughtfully. How interesting. My name is Carmilla. Remember it if you live long enough for regrets. I didn't bother replying. I knew her type, too old, too smug, and probably filled out more tax forms than I'd had birthdays. You didn't beat her with speeches. Beside me, Serafina shifted into a perfect mountain wind stance, moonfall gleaming with frost in her hands. Her face betrayed nothing, but I could feel her mana aligning with mine, the synchronization we'd perfected over years of fighting together. The air around Carmilla shimmered faintly. Pressure built in the chamber like a storm about to break. Even Evolvus, which never cared for drama, seemed to gain weight in my hands. My instincts screamed that I was standing at the edge of a cliff looking down and Carmilla was gravity. But I still moved. Because waiting never helped. And if we were going to die, I wanted to do it with a sword in my hand, not a clever plan that hadn't had time to finish loading. Pure light flared around me, burning bright and sharp against the crimson shadows. The ancient technique passed down through Mount Hua's lineage, not my specialty, but necessary against the undead. First movement, God Flash. And the duel with death began. I moved faster than sense, faster than thought, faster, frankly, than sanity recommended. The world turned into streaks of white and violet, sound twisted into silence, and my sword cut forward like a question that demanded answers. The answer was a magic circle, crimson and glowing, forming in Carmilla's palm like an arrogant no with artistic flair. My blade stopped dead against it with a sound like disappointed metal. Wow, not bad, she said, as if she were reviewing a cup of tea she hadn't ordered. Most humans don't even register to my senses anymore. I yanked my sword back just in time for the entire room to turn into snow and ice. Snow plum blossoms exploded around Carmilla in a flurry of silver and pale blue, each petal sharp enough to split hairs and probably atoms. Serafina's sword was already mid-swing, trailing frost in precise arcs, her expression carved from marble, beautiful, unreadable, and incredibly annoyed. Touch him and die, she stated simply, as if explaining a particularly obvious natural law. Carmilla responded by bleeding into the air. Not metaphorically, actual drops of blood launched from her fingertips, turning the air into a crimson storm that pierced through the blossoms like they owed her money. She's too high, I thought, which, in fairness, was less an observation and more a frantic internal scream. So I did what all smart people do when things get too hard. I cheated. I pushed every ounce of power into overdrive. Deep dark wrapped around Evolvus like shadow given purpose. My aura flared fire, ice, wind, lightning, gravity, all 10 elements howling in synchrony like a very angry orchestra. The blood wyvern bones on my arms cracked under the pressure. Something inside me protested in a language made of pain. Second movement, hollow eclipse. A crescent of annihilation slashed forward, pure energy condensed into a single, vicious arc. Carmilla's eyes narrowed. This time her circle didn't form as quickly, and when it did, her hand trembled ever so slightly. The collision was like a sun having an argument with a black hole. The circle held, but only barely. A hairline fracture appeared across its surface, spreading like a spider's web. And then she moved. One moment she was there. The next she was everywhere. 100 crimson threads carved through the air like reality had sprung a leak. Serafina raised her blade, but she wasn't fast enough. Her ice couldn't keep up. The blood spears came for her chest like they had appointments to keep. Time slowed. I saw each crimson needle with perfect clarity, calculated their trajectories with mathematical precision. I saw where they would pierce Serafina's body, which organs they would shred, how her blood would spray across the chamber walls. I saw her death. Something inside me, something primal, something beyond reason or calculation, screamed in defiance. No. I moved. No thoughts. No hesitation. Just desperation wrapped in bone and lit on fire. My core screamed. I felt it break, no, not break, ascend. A final barrier shattered inside me, something cosmic clicking into place. The sensation was like waking up and realizing the dream was real and also trying to kill you. It was as if I'd been looking at the world through frosted glass my entire life and suddenly someone had wiped it clean. Mana pathways I'd never noticed before revealed themselves like constellations. The universe's underlying structure, its rules, its patterns, its secrets suddenly made a kind of terrible, beautiful sense. Peak integration rank. Power surged into me like I'd grabbed a live wire made of mana and bad decisions. Every cell in my body rewrote itself, recalibrated to contain the new influx of energy. Bones broke and remade themselves. Muscles tore and reformed. My blood boiled and cooled in the span of a heartbeat. I screamed, not in pain, though there was plenty, but in transcendence. Evolvus answered my call, resonating with my new power, ancient inscriptions glowing with white-hot intensity along its blade. The sword, which had always felt like an extension of my arm, now felt like an extension of my soul. My sword swung in a blur, intercepting the spears. I caught 3. The 4th sliced across my side, drawing a line of fire across my ribs. The 5th went through my chest with a wet, terrible sound. Carmilla tilted her head. Interesting, she said, the way an autopsy technician might describe a particularly curious organ. A breakthrough in the face of death. How quaint. I fell to one knee. Everything, lungs, heart, ribs, complained. Loudly. And in unison. Blood pooled beneath me, darkening the stone floor. The world swam in and out of focus, painted in shades of agony. Yet, even as my body failed, my mind remained crystal clear. I could see every mana strand in the room, could follow them to their sources and destinations. I could see the ritual Carmilla had crafted, the way it drained life from the elders to fuel her power. I could see the weakness in its structure, the critical junction point where everything connected. I raised my head, meeting Carmilla's eyes. She stared back, amused at first, then with growing confusion as she realized what I was seeing. Impossible, she whispered. You're just a human. I smiled through bloody teeth. Not anymore. With the last of my strength, I plunged Evolvus into the floor, directly into the center of the blood sigil that powered her ritual. The ancient-grade artifact sword pierced the stone like it was air, driving deep into the very foundation of the pavilion. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The sigil fractured. The blood ritual collapsed in on itself, feedback surging through Carmilla's carefully constructed spell network. The suspended elders dropped to the floor as their bonds dissolved. Power meant to flow into Carmilla reversed direction, tearing back through her like a tsunami. Serafina caught me just before I could fall face first into the floor. Her arms shook. She was speaking, but her voice sounded distant, like someone yelling through a waterfall. The world tilted. As I teetered between life and the other thing, I saw Carmilla's blood circle, the shield she had so smugly maintained, begin to crack. Not shatter. Not explode. But crack like ice under a gentle boot. The chill of the northern peak. It was silent. Absolute. And then her mana trembled. Not much. Not nearly enough. But it was the first time Carmilla had looked concerned. She raised her hand, blood gathering at her fingertips for a final, fatal strike. Even wounded, even with her ritual disrupted, she was still an immortal rank vampire. Still powerful enough to end us both with a thought. But before she could release her attack, the temperature in the room plummeted. The chill of the northern peak. I felt something behind me. A touch on my back, warm, desperate. A sensation I hadn't felt since I was a child being carried through snow too deep for my legs. And then, wetness. Tears. I lost consciousness.